start it all over again. That's a forever war once they do another 9/11.
No, it's because if we're smart, we'll just go in there and we'll just firebomb everything.
Oh, just genocide all the people on the ground. Is that what you're advocating for?
When you go to war, you go there, you kill people, and you break their shit, and you move on.
Hold on. So you would do total war campaign tactics like what they did against Japan, against Afghanistan in an asymmetric war. You just firebomb everybody, man, women, children, terrorists, innocent alike, right?
Did I stutter when I said that Islam is incompatible with Western society?
Oh, hold on a second. So by your logic, hold on. I just want to get you on the record here. It's okay. Just want to get you on the record. So what you're arguing is that if they're Muslim and a terror threat comes out of their country, we should just go in and just napalm, nuke, firebomb, whatever the fuck, all the people there because they're all muzzies, right? Is that what we're getting at?
I do like that word, but no, they don't have to be Muslims. Anyone that we go to war with, we should just go in, kill everything, and move on.
Okay, so okay. I just want you to understand there are 40 million people. I just want you to understand. So there are 40 million people in Afghanistan. About 80,000 to 100,000. It's probably more now, though, are associated with the Taliban now that they're in charge. Mm-hmm. It's probably far higher than that now, but still, it's less than 1% of the population is Taliban. And then there's Al Qaeda. There's a few operatives of Al Qaeda with the Al Qaeda network, and then you got some ISIS K guys, ISIS Khorasan province, and they're operating in Afghanistan. So less than 1% of the country is objectively a terrorist. You first started off by bringing up the buffer meme. You said that Russia's been invaded thousands of times. I study Russian history. They haven't been invaded thousands of times. So you could say since the inception of the Kievan Rus, there have been dozens of invasions. But even then, modern Russia, as we think of it with the Romanov dynasty onwards, we're talking about basically a handful of major invasions. Oftentimes, a lot of the wars in that area were actually initiated by Russia against the Ottoman Empire, for example. So it goes both ways in that regard. The point about a buffer, well, here's the problem with the whole buffer notion. You don't get to have 44 million people's lives and destinies and fate as your buffer. You don't actually get to lord over them under the guise of my feelings. The fact of the matter is Russia has 8,000 nuclear weapons, which is the most of any country in the world. Nobody's invading Russia. In fact, NATO could be entirely around all of their borders and in the Arctic with a bunch of ships, and nobody's invading Russia. The fact of the matter is that NATO only touches on a very small portion of their border. There's a small border in Kaliningrad with Poland and Lithuania, and there's a small border in the very far north on the western face in the Kola Peninsula with Norway. The rest of Russia borders states like Kazakhstan, China, Mongolia, North Korea. They're actually very isolated from NATO on almost all of their borders. The point about Ukraine, if Ukraine were to be inducted into NATO, would Putin consider it a threat? Sure, he can see it as a threat, but my point is that it's about the defense of Ukraine, because the frame of reference that I and my community are operating on is the defense and sovereignty of the Ukrainian people. It's not the feelings of a mafia boss in the Kremlin. Now, you mentioned and brought up that my approach would be using soldiers as a meat shield, putting thousands of soldiers into Ukraine. I disagree. It would actually be a deterrent against Russia. We're not talking about an actual war. The fact of the matter is the only way that there's going to be a war in Ukraine right now is if there's no defense there and Putin feels that he can get away with it. If he feels that he'd actually risk shooting U.S. troops and potentially starting a nuclear war, he's not going to go down that route because he's not an idiot. Now, you said that you disagreed with Biden potentially moving thousands of troops to countries such as Poland near Ukraine. But the problem with this is that we're talking about a number of about 3,000 troops. The U.S. has, depending on the numbers and the day that you go by, potentially upwards of 300,000 troops across Europe, with 60,000 or so in Germany. So we're talking about 1% of the commitment to Europe. Because the United States definitely recognizes that the defense of Europe is actually a key point in America's security strategy. Now, you kind of disagreed with the idea that the security of countries that far away would affect American security, but it's very clear, it should be clear to everybody, that the world, and particularly the United States, is safer having the battle lines of the new Cold War basically right near Russia's western border than in the center of Europe and Germany, when things were a lot more tense, a lot more dangerous. The Soviets had a lot more strength. This is, in a sense, a form of containment. And I believe that the only way to really ensure the security of Ukraine is to put Ukraine into NATO. The reason why NATO didn't want to put them in was because, well, they were worried about what Putin might do. They didn't have the willpower to do it. But I believe if you very quickly brought them into NATO and you had troops there as a defense during that process, you could actually pull the troops away after that, and Putin wouldn't even invade, because then he'd be at war with every country in NATO, and that's a war that he could not win. And so nobody here is advocating for a war. We're actually advocating for the defense of peace. I mean, I don't see how it's in America's interest to have the lines of battle closer to America's borders rather than further away from America's borders. Even if you're just looking at it from an Americentric position, it's definitely in America's interest not to have Russian troops right near Poland instead of in their own borders. They border. Hold on. Poland borders Ukraine, though. There's a border near Lviv with Ukraine. If you wait, 15, you said? It depends on what missile. Depends on what's missile. The Pershings were in West Germany. They had an 8-minute flight time to Moscow, so. No, they're IRBMs, like very fast fired intermediate range ballistic missiles. They're not in operation currently, but they could be brought back. Similar IRBMs could be brought back, given that Russia's been very much unable to follow the terms of the START in recent years. So it's possible. So there's a statement by John Bolton where he says, you know, it's better to kill the enemy over there than have the enemy come and kill you over here. And so the idea here is that you're better off having the ball basically a position as close to their end as opposed to in your end. And so your conception of American security basically ends at America's own borders. The problem with that is, and the fans of the channel remember, we did a game at DEF CON. It's a nuclear war simulator where we simulated what would have happened if the US had been isolationist during the Cold War and it was just America, North America versus the entire world. And America got the shit nuked out of it. And the Soviet world only lost about 15% of their population. And the fact of the matter is, yeah, that's a game. It's not necessarily a particularly realistic situation, but it shows you that when you're outnumbered against an entire world that's able to amass about 95% of the resources in terms of population and industry against the United States, at that point, a war that would break out would eventually guarantee a loss for the United States, even if it took 30 or 40 years for the Soviets to build up enough strength to invade. Now we're talking about Russia. The thing with Russia is that if you let Ukraine fall, Poland's next. And there's a chance that if you say, okay, well, we don't care enough to defend Ukraine, so they can basically have it. There's a chance that Putin then gets cocky and reasons that he might be able to take Poland, even though Poland's NATO, or he might be able to take the Baltics, even though they're NATO. Because the Article 5 convention in NATO, that actually only matters if America comes to the battle. Because you talked about, well, what happens if, what if the European countries just do it or whatever? Why does it have to be the United States? Well, it has to be the United States because the United States is the leader of the free world. The United States has far more military power than any of these other countries. And in fact, the United States has historically over a very long time, basically up until Trump was the president, said, we don't actually want you guys in Europe to have particularly big militaries because you're in our sphere of hegemony. So in other words, we'll cover your defense, but we get to trade with you and you basically get to share our culture and all that. So it was a two-way street in that America was the umbrella, but then these other countries basically Germany wasn't just allowed to build up 1 million, 10 million troops or whatever. The idea was to prevent a third world war and to prevent another era of multipolarity like we saw in World War II or like we saw in World War I, because polarity is the greatest threat of peace. Or multipolarity, rather, is the greatest threat of peace because a multipolar order is incredibly unstable and will eventually lead to a world war. And so all of this goes back to the idea that even if you only care just about America and you didn't care about the people of Europe or the people of Ukraine, it's actually still in your strategic interest as the United States to have troops closer to Russia than wait for the Russian troops to come closer to you. Because your odds of winning a war, if it ever were to break out, would be higher if you're the one putting pressure on them than if you wait for them to put pressure on you.
I believe Seoul would be taken in a matter of 15 minutes, and that's a very like strong estimate for North Korea. That is the model they try to utilize in all their models. Um, and I'm not willing to put more American soldiers in that bet. It's not worth it to the U.S. If it is worth it to Europe, cool. Then we need to put some French soldiers there. We need to put some German soldiers there. We need to put some UK soldiers there. We need to have America say, look, we're going to keep our Navy going around like we always do our freedom of navigation deals. And of course, I will tell you right now, there is probably about 6 nuclear subs on deployment right now, just sitting and waiting to launch. And they are a mere minutes from Moscow and everything else. Because when you attack the capital city. If you're really going to if you're going to go in, you're going to go in hard. You're going to do it right the first time. And I've seen a lot of the plans. I was mostly a tactical individual where, because I was enlisted, but I did get to talk to many people on the strategic level, talking about generals and stuff like that, war gaming, war planning. I've been through all these exercises. I know some of the operation standards that they go under. And I just look at it like this. There's no reason to thin out America forces right now when we're actually looking, if this stuff pops off in Ukraine, the next thing that is more than likely going to happen is that the Chinese is going to cross the Strait of Taiwan and they're going to take Taiwan. Taiwan is actually a true national security issue. So we need Americans ready to go for that, because that is going to be the real deal. We don't need to concern ourselves with Russia. We need to concern ourselves more with Taiwan.
Yeah, that's dumb. That's basically like saying, we can't deal with North Korea and we can't deal with Iran at the same time. We have to pick one or whatever. It's like, no, you can walk and chew bubblegum. The fact of the matter is that ignoring Russia when Russia is far more belligerent than China. Here's the thing about China. China is an enemy, absolutely, but China's playing a very long-run game. Russia's not. Russia's moving like right now. Russia's, basically violating Western sovereignty, using weapons of mass destruction on British soil in recent years, killing British civilians. They have hacked into U.S. voter registries, not to mention taking actual territory on the ground in Crimea, in eastern Ukraine, and in Georgia, whereas China, in contrast, China's doing a genocide. China's building up their military. China's doing a lot of sketchy debt deals with countries around the world, but they're not like invading people yet, and I don't think they will be anytime soon. Though, there's a chance they could take Taiwan or make an attempt at Taiwan. That's actually an argument. That's a similar line of reasoning, though, to what I'm arguing in Ukraine, which is, in Taiwan, I've argued for stationing nuclear weapons there. You don't even need to put a very high number of troops there. You just need to have short range and intermediate range nukes so that they know if they land on the beaches, they're getting nuked on the beaches, and their cities are in range in their mainland if they screw around with Taiwan. That's the way that you guarantee Taiwanese sovereignty. Ukraine is in a similar circumstance. If you put nuclear weapons in Ukraine, that would obviously deter Russia. They actually used to have nuclear weapons, but they gave them up because Russia promised that they wouldn't attack them. You also have, of course, the situation with Russia and their designs on Ukraine, that it doesn't just end there. I mean, we know that Putin wants the Baltics, and he would eventually come for Poland. You said, why would he ever think about going after Poland? Well, the fact is, he wants to restore the battle lines to where they were in Germany. Like, he wants all of Eastern Europe as this so-called sphere of influence. And so you mentioned Article 5. I mentioned Article 5. My point was, if you show weakness in Ukraine and you basically let him have Ukraine, he might take from that a lesson that, well, now he can screw around with NATO. And, Article 5, as I said, it's only as good as people are actually willing to enforce it. So after 9/11, it was invoked and enforced. But if Russia goes into Poland, it's very possible that people like you will be sitting here saying, why should we die over Poland? Let's just let Russia have it, even though they're NATO. And then NATO doesn't mean anything anymore. Now you're in a very dangerous world, because at that point, Putin doesn't even have to invade these countries. He doesn't then have to invade Estonia or Lithuania, because they're smart. They'll know that they're next. So they'll actually call up Putin and say, what do we have to do? What ways can we screw over US interests to please you so that you don't send in the tanks? And so they'll become de facto Russian puppet states without him even having to invade, because he'll have set the example that NATO doesn't actually mean business anymore in the face of Russia. And so, and if NATO did get invoked, if Article 5 did get invoked and the US came there, then you have the danger of potentially a nuclear war evolving from that. And so I think we're best off to nip this in the bud and say, no, you don't get any more territory. You can keep Crimea, you can keep the Donbass, good for you. You got lucky with Obama, but we're actually not going to allow this anymore. The buck stops here. It's over. That's the extent of your expansion into Europe. And if you move any further forward, you're going to then be basically shooting at U.S. troops, which would be acting then as a hair trigger defense, which would potentially start a nuclear war. And Putin knows that, so he's not going to screw around. So you said basically, well, Taiwan is a security threat, but Ukraine isn't. I have a feeling that the reason why you feel that way is that a lot of the culture, the discourse right now in right-wing politics is anti-China, and I agree, China's an enemy, but it wants to give a pass to Russia. My case is that they're both equally enemies. It's just that Russia's far more belligerent than China is, and so Russia's a more immediate threat than China is. So that's my approach.
I think you're mischaracterizing my stance. I have, from the get-go, I have said, look, any NATO country, any allied country that we're in treaties with, we have to come to their defense. Otherwise, the treaties are worthless. I am in full support of supporting any NATO country. The fact that Ukraine is not in NATO is actually a determinant factor in the calculus that I have made. Now, when you actually deal with European powers, we're talking about UK, France, I believe even Spain has nuclear weapons. So anytime you deal with NATO,
Spain doesn't have nukes.
I'll have to check up on that.
Yeah, Spain doesn't have nuclear weapons.
It'll be the first time I've been wrong. But France and England both are nuclear superpowers, even though the numbers of nukes that they have are drastically outnumbered by both Russia and the U.S.
They're not superpowers. They're great powers. They're not superpowers. Look, you said earlier, I just want to note for the record, because the audio was disabled because OBS is trash and defaulted to no sound instead of speakers. You said earlier, though, that you didn't think that Poland and Ukraine bordered each other, and now you're saying that you think that Spain has nuclear weapons. So I guess my point is, if you don't know that much about Europe, if you don't know that much about the actual strategic reality there, I mean, look, you can have an opinion on it. It's just not very well informed. And I would say it's all great if you got tactical experience, but you're not able to actually perceive the broader national security interest of the U.S. in the 21st century. You're just looking at things in this very narrowly focused lens of basically, oh, well, people could get hurt. It's like, yeah, well, people are going to get hurt if you don't defend Ukraine.
Okay, so my geography isn't the strongest, but look, guy, I have been on 4 different continents fighting wars. I know what the modern battlefield looks like, and the majority of war is actually done virtually. It's actually going on right now as we speak. It's constantly happening. Like you mentioned, the Russia did some cybernetic war stuff in regards to the actual votes and things like that, which yeah, we should have actually responded with some really heavy sanctions, and we could have launched the frickin' speckled trout and knocked out some of their power with a nice little EMP pulse without having to launch nuclear weapons. But hey, my ways are a little.
That could trigger a war, though. Cyber warfare is one thing. EMP, though, like I'm a hawk. I'm not advocating for doing a war against Russia, though. So, I'm not hawk on Iran. I'm not hawk on Russia. That's actually kind of dangerous.
What they did was an actual cause bell action. It actually allows for us to engage in war activities with or without declaring war under international laws. What Russia has done on multiple times has been war type activities, but I am more along the lines of, hey, let's use a diplomatic approach instead of actually engaging actual soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, because until you've been to war, you don't know how bad it is. And one thing that really, really tweaks me, man, what really gets me about you hawk types is none of y'all have a DD-214 or any time, nor do they.
So this is the when are you joining the military meme. That is a logical no, it's a specialization division of labor fallacy, right? It's like saying, oh, you want to legalize weed? Are you a criminal judge? Are you a pharmaceutical a doctor or whatever? It's like, oh, well, therefore, how can you have an opinion on it? Oh, you want to raise or lower taxes? Are you an accountant? Do you work for the IRS? It's like, no, how about this? How about this? There's a different skill set that goes into foreign policy, international relations versus firing a gun. Now, you could do both. Dan Crenshaw does both, for example. You could do one or you could do the other. But the fact that you might have a very strong background in foreign policy doesn't mean you're going to be very good with a gun, and vice versa. Dan Crenshaw happens to do both. Dan Crenshaw happens to do both, but you could do one or the other.
No, Dan Crenshaw never did foreign policy. Dan Crenshaw he was a freaking SEAL.
No. I said he's a Congress member right now. He's a Congress member right now advocating. So he's a Congress member. He's a Congress member right now who's advocating, or was at least advocating for the U.S. to have a continued presence in Afghanistan. He's definitely concerned about the Iranian threat. So he actually does look at things on a strategic level. He also has the tactical experience of actually being on the ground. A lot of people have one or the other. They're actually very different skill sets, though. Dan Crenshaw is actually kind of rare in that regard. And so, I mean, this is kind of a good example of it where, you know, you mentioned that you've been on, I believe you said 4 different deployments, yet you think that you think that Spain has nuclear weapons and you don't think that Poland borders Ukraine. So, I mean, how are we supposed to take that seriously?
So the fact that I happened to forget a map and I brought it up immediately and immediately corrected myself. I don't keep track of all who has nuclear weapons within the world. Why? Because I don't care about nuclear weapons, because 99 times out of 100, they're not even going to be used. There's only been two instances when nuclear weapons have been utilized in war. Guess who's dropped both of them?
And that was justified, though. Look, here's the thing: nuclear weapons. So you're not. Look, I just want to get you on the record here. You're not actually concerned about nuclear proliferation. Like, let's say Iran got some nukes and North Korea got more nukes, and let's say Syria got some nukes, and let's say Spain actually got nukes. That wouldn't concern you at all. You'd say, whatever, it's their business. Is that your attitude?
Pretty much. Look, it is actually my stance. I think we should. I don't care. Look, I think that we should release fucking Israel and let them do what they want to do with Iran. They'll take care of it, Ricky Tick. They're already flying F-35s over to Tehran on a bi-weekly basis now as we speak.
Wait, over to Tehran? You mean practicing? They're not actually flying over Iranian airspace, right?
No, they are.
Wait. Hold on. So the Israeli Defense Forces are actually doing practice bombing runs on targets in Iran. And in those practices, they're actually in Iranian airspace, but they're stealth, so Iran can't do anything about it. That's your argument?
They have. So it came out 2 years ago? No, a year ago, I think. They came public with some intel because they're doing reconnaissance flights over Tehran. It happens all the time. The F-35 have flown at proper angles with known SAM sites. Is damn near undetectable. However, if they go with certain payload outfits and stuff, they're very detectable.
Wait, but that's not true, though, because what we know about the F-35 is that it reduces the radar signature of it, but it doesn't actually make it invisible. It just reduces the range.
No, it doesn't make it invisible. But
okay,
you can't see the return. You cannot see the return because it is too small. It is down to what? 1/100th of a freaking inch is actually detectable. You can't see that on a radar screen. I don't know how many radars you've looked at,
until it gets close to because even an old SAM site's going to pick it up once it's within a sufficient range. And Iran has a lot of SAM sites across their territory.
When you're dealing with incursion areas such as that, what you do is you fly at different angles. You know what angles you can and cannot fly with. If you have them mapped out, which I'll tell you this, things like the RC-135 platform, which operates in that area out out of Doha. Yeah, I think it's Doha. The U.S. Air Force. They map out all the ELINT areas on the regular. It's amazing what that platform can do, and we share all that information with all of our allies. Israel happens to be one of them. So about a year ago, they put out a deal where they were talking about some reconnaissance stuff that they come out with. They're not doing bombing runs. No, they run over there and they do electrical intelligence work. It's very simple, and the F-35 is more than capable of doing that. You
Okay,
were
but
actually touted about how amazing the F-35 is. I'll tell you from someone who actually works with the platform, it's pretty cool. Not as amazing as you think it is, but hey, yes, it does some amazing stuff nonetheless. The electronic suite on it is spectacular, and the F-22 is actually a little bit better with their electronic suite because having the two engines allow them to carry more weight. And yeah, but the F-22 is far more a superior stealth aircraft overall to the F-35. The F-35 is they want to call it a fifth generation. The avionics suite and everything makes it fifth generation, but with the RAM and everything that's on it and its stealth profile, it's more of a 4.8. But yeah, it's a decent aircraft, very capable for things like ELINT, reconnaissance, and stuff like that. And the Israelis use it on the regular. Yes.
so okay, yeah, but your argument is that the Israeli Defense Force sends F-35s to penetrate Iranian airspace to practice hitting their targets. I've seen no proof of that.
Okay.
Like, what's your
Well,
source?
my source is the IDF. When they put out the information, they actually came out with some pictures. I'm not I don't have it ready with me, but it's just a matter of these things can happen, does happen. And look, if I had it my way, I would just say, hey, Israel, go ahead and take care of Iran. And they would. They would take care of Iran, and they actually already have plenty of reason because of all the threats that have been made. And of course, the way they fund what is it? The PL is it PLA now or PLO? PLO was the old one.
Oh, the
PLA.
PLO is the old one. Iran
Yeah.
funds a lot of stuff. They fund Hezbollah, they fund Assad. They're involved with the Palestinian government in Gaza and the West Bank. They're obviously financing the Houthis. They're doing a lot of shady shit. Some of it more covert, some of it more overt. But I guess getting back to what we were talking about here, I don't believe that Israel has ever publicly stated that they've sent F-35s into Iranian airspace. That I'm very skeptical about that. I'll say this. I'm not going to look through a bunch of articles right now, but here's the thing. We were talking about nuclear proliferation, and you basically said that you weren't really concerned about it. So in your view, do you think that a world in which far more countries have nuclear weapons is going to be safer than the one that we have now? Or do you think that it's going to be more dangerous? Or do you think that it's going to be just the same chance of war as there is today?
So there are certain countries that I would definitely think I would not want to have nuclear weapons. A lot of the Middle Eastern countries, of course, would be high on those lists. Anytime you see any kind of despotic, frickin' religious-driven governments and stuff, yeah, I don't support that kind of stuff. But as far as Western powers, I have no issues with the vast majority of them holding nuclear weapons because they hold Western values. The idea of you mentioned you alluded to American cultural hegemony abroad is one of the best things that's ever happened to Europe and things like that. You're not wrong. I'm not going to argue against that. I have no problem with America's cultural expansion in a way that we have tried to use the hegemony to counter things that have happened. Because honestly, when we looked at what happened with the Treaty of Versailles, we neutered Germany and we isolated them to a point that it brought a lot of really bad feelings amongst the Germans, and it allowed for some little shithead with a bad mustache to come into power down the road. We all know how that ended. But I think when it comes down to it, there is a time where we need to actually say, look, it is time for some of these countries to actually stand up for themselves. I have no problem backing Germany if they were to put their soldiers in the way of Putin. and they went into the Ukraine. But really, Germany isn't going to do that because they've done cucked themselves to the Russians because they have shut down all their nuclear power in exchange for cheap Russian oil and gas. So the Germans, although I believe they've deployed like 4 fighters towards Poland or something as a show of force. I mean, 4 fighters, that's nothing. I think Spain has delivered a couple. France has delivered a couple of fighters, and some. I think they even brought some of the French Foreign Legion out in. I'm wanting to say they're in Poland right now, which the French Foreign Legion are an amazing unit, but there's not enough of them to deter Russian attack. But there is something about actual Europe standing up for themselves. I have no problems Americans supporting in case something happens, but I don't want American soldiers. Look, we have been deployed all over the frickin' world on the war on frickin' terror. How did that one turn out? Sure, we killed Saddam Hussein, and eventually we killed Osama bin Laden, and we chopped him up into multiple pieces, and we dumped his ass in the Indian Ocean. But it really didn't solve anything, did it? And then we ended up, we left Afghanistan, which was something I fully supported, but we did it wrong. And it's because, well, politicians are idiots. I don't know why the hell you would allow a base like Bagram, you would cede that in exchange for that little nothing of a dirt strip they have down in Kabul. It's ridiculous. We could have gotten more people out much quicker using C5s out of Bagram than we ever could with C17s out of Kabul. But that was just poor planning. It was poor tactical, strategic planning, whatever you want to call it. And then to save a little bit of face, Biden, of course, decided that he was gonna drone strike some kids and a couple of adults. Because we're gonna believe what a bunch of Taliban freaking soldiers tell the American.
He was under the impression that was ISIS-K. Now, look, I've called for Biden to be impeached. I despise Biden. Biden pulling out of Afghanistan before the job was done was going to go down as one of America's biggest blunders. And America wasn't defeated in Afghanistan. Biden just gave up. America could stay there for 1,000 years, like in Germany or Japan. So the thing is, except it wasn't, because the Taliban came back into power. So that the Afghan National Army was not at a sufficient state of maturity to carry out their own defense yet. Now, they had done a lot of the fighting, but I want to get back to the other arguments that you were bringing up first, which was about nuclear proliferation. So no, I don't want a lot of Western countries to have nukes. Like, if I'm in the position of the U.S. government, here's what I'd want. I'd want the Western world to not potentially become a threat to your own hegemony. So you basically say, okay, you guys are going to be weaker than you might otherwise be in a multipolar situation, but we're going to cover your defense. That's actually a more stable world than, like, say, let's have Germany have 10,000 nukes and UK has 10,000 nukes and France has 10,000 nukes, because then what happens if they start fighting, or what happens if they eventually start fighting you, right? Because it's not unthinkable to think that Germany could become an enemy again. So there's actually a really good argument for Germany staying relatively weak. Now, you're right about Germany being weak to Russia. That's a huge problem. And I've argued that the best way to defeat Russia is to get as much infrastructure in Canada and the US into oil and gas, and ship oil and gas over to Europe to get them off of their dependence on Russia, because we have that stuff in Alberta. We could absolutely do that. And we just need to get rid of the Green parties. We need to get rid of the Russian influence on our discourse here, basically carbon taxes, all that type of stuff that Putin promotes in order to make us not compete with him on oil and gas. We need to get serious about that and economically bankrupt Russia. That's my approach there. But the point about Ukraine, though, again, we're not talking about a war. We're talking about deterring a war, because you've got U.S. troops in other countries in Europe, and Russia's not going in there. But there's basically negligible numbers of U.S. troops in Ukraine, and there's no formal alliance with Ukraine, and now Russia's thinking about going in there. But the values, though, are the same whether they're in an alliance or not. So the values in the UK are similar to those in Ukraine. They're both liberal countries. And so I guess my question to you then is, does it matter that you have a country that shares American values, wants to be a part of Europe, wants to be a part of NATO, believes in democracy, rule of law, all this stuff? Do you think that it matters that 44 million people might become subjects of a fascist empire that rolls in the tanks? Does that matter to you at all?
You keep using that word fascist. What are you using to define that term?
Fascist?
Yes, because there's only been 3 fascist regimes that's ever existed.
Well, that's not true. Like, officially, they called themselves fascist, sure. But so fascist is basically, you look at Russia, the control that the government has over private industry, the police state that they have, the ultra conservative draconian regime that they have, the social policies, all this sort of stuff, the basically the jackboots order that they've got, the aesthetics of the regime, the intertwining of the regime and the religion, the church, all this stuff, it all boils together to the point that I can consider them a fascist empire. They're definitely not liberal. They're definitely not liberal, and they're not communist anymore. They swapped out communism for fascism.
So Christian Orthodoxy is the prevailing religion that exists over in Russia, although it is still not the majority of Russians that actually follow Christian Orthodoxy.
5% go to church, so
yeah.
They're like atheists, man.
The majority of them are atheists, and that's a byproduct of communism, because communism in itself has to become a religion. It has to destroy every other religion in order for it to actually work. I just don't see it, man, because I don't see it as that fascist.
Wait, you don't see them as fascists? They arrest anybody that advocates for democracy. They put them into camps, into gulags.
So does frickin' China.
Well, they're communist. I didn't argue that's a different type of tyranny, though. That's a different type of tyranny. With China,
they're not really communist at all. The Chinese claim they're communists, but they're ultimately capitalist with a real strong authoritarian side. Maybe they're closer to fascist than maybe what Russia is.
No, they're not capitalists. You can't even own your own house in China. You're just leasing property from the party, right? There's no private ownership in China. You can be the biggest billionaire in the country, and they can disappear you if you go away from the good graces of the great leader. So no, they're not capitalists. To call that a capitalist system is a great perversion of what capitalism meant. Pinochet was a capitalist. He was an authoritarian. That's an authoritarian capitalist system. China, they're not authoritarian capitalists. They're socialist system trying to build communism, dude. Like, you look at their end goal. What's their end goal? Their end goal is world communism. It's not fascism. It's world communism.
But they participate in capitalist type economic policies where their own people may not be able to own property and stuff. And yes, the state owns the property. Which is more communistic, but they engage in more of free market capitalism with the West, because that is what we deal with, and they are beating us on that front.
But that's not true, though. They're not free market. If you want to do business in China, you basically have to set up a Chinese subsidiary that's like half of it has to be based there. They sub-optimize on the World Trade Organization to screw everybody else over. They don't play by any rules. The government has an absolute influence on any big corporations. Basically, anybody there who's going to be big has to play ball with the party, or they get disappeared. And there are billionaires in China that have just vanished, right? That's not a thing that happens in America. That they're not a capitalist system. Now, they're not even close to it. People call it state capitalist or whatever. They're not a capitalist system. What they fundamentally are is a socialist system trying to build communism. So when I say that they're communists, I'm not saying they're literally communist. They're communist in the same way the Soviet Union was, which is they aspire to be. Like, they're a communist party, but they're not economically communist yet, because as Marx and Engels wrote, you can't just take an agrarian backwater and turn it into communism. You actually have to establish the material conditions of capitalism to get to socialism, to then get to communism. But but understand something: the material conditions of capitalism that the Dangists and Hu Jintao, and even to some extent now with Xi Jinping, what they've been trying to build isn't actually capitalism as we would conceive of property rights and free markets. It's just the conditions, it's the factories, it's the industry, it's the money, but it's not actually the principles of capitalism. And they put this into their effort to eventually consolidate a global communist world, but they know they can't do it if they're a poor Maoist backwater. They have to take our money and use it against us, but that doesn't make them capitalists. It just makes them communists that know how to use capitalist investment against capitalism, is my point.
Okay, fair. And actually, that's a pretty strong assessment. So I had a Chinese foreign exchange student living with me for about a year or so, and her parents were pharmacists. The reason why I don't think they're communists because not everyone lives the exact same type of economic life because of where they are. Their lot in life was much higher. In fact, even under the one child in China policy, they were actually allowed to have two children after they paid, I think it was a $5,000 equivalent
Right.
payment to the government and everything, and that isn't really given out to everyone there in China. You have to be a certain level within the party in order to do that. But no, I don't consider them fascist. You declare a lot of different groups to be fascist.
Wait, are we talking about China or are we talking about Russia?
Russia. I don't think Russia is fascist. I believe that there is authoritarian. They're not really capitalist. They're a weird hybrid. Last time I was in Moscow, I saw a budding capitalist style economy trying to come up because I've done a little bit of treaty work with Open Skies, and I thought it was quite interesting talking to some of the people on the ground there, learning how they live, how they do things, and of course doing things like selling them Levi jeans because those are freaking gold to those people. I think it's funny, but I really wouldn't call it fascist. Yes, you do see certain individuals like journalists and stuff that speak out against Putin. They tend to disappear. That happens, but look, I'm not saying that they're not authoritarian. I just think fascist is the wrong prescription. Just my opinion. I don't see it as, because with fascism, you actually see the private ownership of land with state control of how that land is utilized. You don't really see that. You see the state, the state doesn't really own the land. There's private ownership of land.
But that's not true, though. Look at what happened to Khodorkovsky, right? He was the richest man in Russia, and he didn't follow Putin's direction one day, and then all of a sudden he was broke and had to flee to Europe after going to jail for a long time. So yeah, you can say it's private in name, but you know that all those oligarchs, since okay, that's bullshit. Okay, so ever since Putin came to power and he went after the mafia state and he cracked down and he made sure that they got the message. Ever since that day, ever since he had that meeting, and there's that famous meeting with all the billionaires and stuff, they kissed the ring. So yeah, it's not a formal state directive the same way that Mussolini had, but it's an informal form of fascism. If you don't go along with Putin's agenda and the state's agenda, your private property can be confiscated and you can wind up in a gulag. And you even said it's not a capitalist system. They're not communists. My point is that they're fascists. Like, you can say they're authoritarian or whatever. I don't think it's that outrageous to see them as a far right petrostate with a fascistic social culture and a very, very troubling intermingling of the state and the official religion, coupled with a very, very heavy-handed approach to private enterprise. And just because it's not official doesn't mean it's not there. Because I'll tell you this, you can be the richest man in Russia, and if you don't do what Putin and the state want, now you're the poorest man in Russia. So
you could be the richest man in America, and suddenly the United States government with all of its weight can come down on your head because you broke some law. They could freeze all of your assets and everything. They can confiscate your land.
If you broke the law. If you broke the law.
Yes. And that really isn't all that hard to do. I
Wait, are
assure
you advocating that every billionaire in America is a tax crook or something?
No, no.
Okay.
What I'm saying is you're describing processes that actually exist here in the Western world as well. All they have to do is break a law. And in order for these laws to be broken, we have hundreds of thousands of laws on the books, and many of them are not enforced. What do you think they did with organized crime? They froze assets and everything else. That's what they did to them. That's why the FBI existed. That's why the majority of people that work for the FBI happen to be accountants.
So there's a difference between mob bosses and what Mikhail Khodorkovsky did. Khodorkovsky didn't break any laws. He was out of the good graces of Putin. So there's a difference in America between you did tax fraud and they get you on tax fraud versus you did nothing wrong, but Joe Biden doesn't like you, so you're going to a camp now and the state's taking your assets. That, like, you've got to be insane or living under a rock. And the fact that you've been to Russia and you're still making this false equivalence is honestly embarrassing, because you have to know, if you've been paying attention to anything that happens in Russia, that the system that they have there of their oligarchy and how they have to kiss the ring of Putin, nobody has to kiss the ring of Biden. In fact, there are billionaires in America, like Rick Mercer, for example, or Robert Mercer, I forget his name, Robert and Rebecca Mercer. They funded Trump. They're staunchly Republican. They're not kissing the ring of Joe Biden. Has Joe Biden put them in federal prison? No, they still got their yachts and stuff. So they're actually free citizens in America, and they're billionaires, and Joe Biden doesn't like them and they don't like Joe Biden. You can't do that in Russia. You can't be a billionaire in Russia and not like Putin and be public about it, because Putin's not going to like you, and that's not going to end well, right? And it doesn't matter how much money you have over there. Like, literally, Mikhail Khodorkovsky was the richest man in Russia, and, you know, he went to jail. So
over the summer, it was actually confirmed that the Department of Justice is actually investigating Tucker Carlson. Yes. So if you go against Biden, you know, look, things happen, and there's a lot of things that the Biden administration
What is he being investigated for?
It was just a blanket investigation. Tucker Carlson actually talked about it on his show. It was confirmed by the DOJ, and then it went away. But yes, the weaponization of government against individuals, we saw this under Obama with the IRS and things like the the 503C classifications, Lois Lerner, I believe it was. We see government used in partisan attacks, usually under Democrat rule. Seems to be the thing.
Really? Well, but to the extent that you could ever make an argument for this sort of behavior, you have to point to the Trump administration. But I would note that Trump was a really big exception, because the American rule of law is actually really strong. But Trump he wanted Jeff Sessions to go after people and make it political and use the DOJ in a political manner. And Jeff Sessions actually resigned. But the thing is, Donald Trump is an example of this. Of actually trying to put his political opponents basically in a similar sort of thing. But he's an admirer of Putin. He owes money to Putin. He's a friend of Putin. He admires Xi Jinping. So, of course, he would behave like that. But the American system didn't really let him get away with it, and people actually stood up to it. Now, I've said before, I think that people should be investigated. I think if you're a big media figure, you should be investigated to see if you're getting money from, like, Russia or Syria or whatever. So, for example, we know Jimmy Dore, he's even admitted it, that he got a minimum of $1,000 from the Syrian regime. I think that there should be congressional hearings on that as basically anti-American activities, you know? So I don't actually have a problem with that. But again, the difference between something being political. The difference between something being political. The difference between something being political and something being fascist, the way, like, the difference between something being political or fascist, like how they do it in Russia, versus the American system, is that in the American system, the law applies to everybody equally. So whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, if you commit tax fraud, you can go to jail for that. Whereas in Russia, the law is applied if you're an enemy of Putin, they get you. So the difference there is it's actually it's a personalized and partisan thing in Russia. It's not in the United States. And the fact that Tucker Carlson's not in jail, I mean, and you're a joke, because the only extent to which you could make an argument for this is America under the Trump administration. He's really the only president in recent times, besides Richard Nixon, that really tried to politicize the Department of Justice. So,
are you fucking kidding me?
No, I'm dead serious.
Kidding me? So I linked a story down in our little chat. It's about the NSA opened review of Tucker Carlson's spying allegations. It's CBS, so don't worry. You'll probably say that it's legitimate, but there's also Wall Street Journal and stuff like that actually talks about that. You could look at how the Obama administration utilized the IRS with Lois Lerner, and you want to say, oh, Nixon. Yes, Nixon was an asshole and did some bad shit. Let's not get it wrong. I'm not going to say the Republicans are sans fault whatsoever, because both parties freaking suck. But no, if you want honest and actually relevant, actual modern times examples, we're looking directly at the Biden administration right now that is doing that against Tucker Carlson. We're looking at the Obama administration that did that through the IRS with Lois Lerner, with a bunch of audits and everything else. If you want to know, this is unacceptable. It's actually against the First Amendment. But that's not what we're talking about today. You're sitting there claiming that
need
Russia...
evidence. So I need evidence that the IRS... So your argument is everybody basically commits some sort of tax violation, but the IRS only goes after everyone. The IRS only goes after Republicans or whatever, or the majority goes after Republicans. But that's just not true, though. To the extent that the justice system has been utilized to try to put in jail political opponents, that was most exemplified by Donald Trump. Now, you could look at Richard Nixon going way back, but my point is about recent memory. Donald Trump's the dude who tried to sick Jeff Sessions in the Department of Justice on his political enemies, and even Sessions refused
that was stupid. That was terrible. He shouldn't have even suggested things like that. But when you actually see it being carried out by other administrations, so the mere suggestion of Donald Trump, it is shitty by itself. But the fact that it didn't happen is actually a boon to the Republicans, showing that, yes, Republicans will actually stand up to their leaders, where people like Biden, under his instruction, the NSA is actually openly investigating journalists. First Amendment, and I also linked the Lois Lerner stuff in case you want to.
You're talking about the Assange thing. You're talking about the Assange thing, right?
No, I am not talking about Assange. So Assange has nothing to do with this.
So whatsoever. You're talking about that the Biden administration has ordered the NSA to basically tap journalists in the United States that I guess lean Republican or conservative. That's your claim. Is that correct?
Yeah. Okay,
and so what's your evidence?
I've linked it. I've already linked you evidence.
Okay, so I'm not in your chat right now, so I'm going to
have
to...
No, it's not in my chat. It's in our
okay, DM. In the Discord. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. No. See, I bring stuff, man. I'm going to be, when I have it readily available.
So the thing is, so we obviously can't read a full article or anything here in this debate.
No. I want you to read this later, and you'll reflect on it, and I'm sure you'll make commentary on it. I mean, that's fine. Look, we're not, but to sit there and say, oh, well, they're a fascist state because they do this, and look, I
listed a number. Calm down. I listed a number of reasons why they were fascists. I mentioned the intermingling of the church and the state. I mentioned the ultra-conservative
of church and state when less than 5% of the actual population is even religious. Come on.
So the ultra-conservative. Well, no. But I'm the one who brought up that point. That Putin's trying to force a religion down a bunch of atheist throats. The ultra-conservative reactionary social agenda they have, the revanchism they have, the chauvinism that they have. I mean, look, Russia is such a chauvinist society. I mean, if you just watch their film, if you watch their films, for example, you can see the portrayal in popular Russian media of how they portray Ukraine, how they portray Central Europe and stuff. They view them as their bitches, basically. and they view Russia's rightful place as the big Russians versus the little Ukrainians, and they have this very chauvinistic attitude towards Westerners and towards basically anybody who's not the great Russian people, all this sort of stuff. This is common fascist rhetoric. Just because they're not officially fascist in the way that Italy was doesn't mean that they're not fascist. And for you to compare this to the United States, but the United States literally has hate speech legislation, which you're against. The United States actually, in fact, in the United States, if you took on a very chauvinist direction, the way that they do in Russia, you went after black people or Jews or whatever, the way that they do in Russia, you'd actually go to prison. That's actually not tolerated in the United States. The United States actually has forced equality. Like you're forced to be equal under the law. That's not true in Russia. In Russia, in fact, you can be outright hateful towards Ukrainians, towards blacks, towards any sort of migrants, towards Jews, and nothing's going to happen to you. Whereas in the United States, if you commit hate crimes, you can actually go to jail. In Germany or Canada, you can even be prosecuted for hate speech. But you're against the hate crime legislation in the U.S. So the funny thing is so you're somebody who wants to make America more like Russia, but you don't think that Russia's fascist. So that's kind of funny to me.
So I don't want to make it more like Russia. Now you are right. I am against what is it? I'm against hate speech laws, and I'm against hate crimes because crime is hate. Period.
But that's stupid.
No, it isn't.
But that's stupid because there's a difference between. But there's a difference between lynching a guy for being black and murdering him versus breaking into a guy's place and stealing his TV. Who happens to let's just say be white, and it's white on white crime, and you break into his place. That's a different, like, look, to say that those are both instances of hate is a goober argument. I'm just going to be real with you. When I heard you make that argument to Dylan Burns,
I know you like to play the whole goober thing, and
I mean, but what else am I supposed to say though? Because you're comparing, you're saying that somebody being lynched on the basis of their race is hate. And so is breaking into a guy's place and taking his TV, and maybe like doing assault on the guy or whatever. That's also hate, even though they're both white in that case.
So you're actually talking about three different styles of crime there. Lynching is extrajudicial enforcement of some type of arbitrary law or something that's fucking ridiculous and it's hateful and it's terrible. And yeah, it's bad. But it's not as equal as breaking into someone's house. Someone breaks into my house, I don't give a shit what the color is. I'm going to just shoot them.
Okay, so let's do an equivalent example then. White guy shoots a white guy, takes his car. White guy shoots a black guy and writes the N-word on his body. So you think those are both instances of hate? But they're both hate.
If a white guy shoots a black guy and then writes the N-word on his body, wow, that is a reach.
I'm just giving you an example. That's a clear-cut case of a hate crime, right?
So if it was a white guy that shot a white guy and then wrote the C slur or the N slur on them.
Okay, but you understand one is definitively a case of racial hate. Okay. The other is just a crime. It's just murder. So you said all crime is hate. But that's a false equivalence, though, because some crime is motivated by racial hate, others aren't.
If you were committing violence against another individual, that is an act of hate.
Okay, well, that's a crime, and you can be prosecuted for that crime, but there's an additional aggravating factor if it's on the basis of going after a protected class. The United States understands this. Canada understands this. The UK understands this. Again, it seems like...
But it's only a one-directional thing. Because if you had some black separatists actually lynch white people,
okay, but that doesn't happen though. But that's not a thing.
No, it can be a thing, and yes, it has been a thing. There are several times that black
and that would be prosecuted as a hate crime. That would be prosecuted as a hate crime if it were to ever happen. It absolutely would be prosecuted as a hate crime. Like I'm
gonna need some exampps of that, man.
Well, I can't give you examples because it never happens. It's just a made-up example by goober cons who want to fearmonger about minorities. Look, we were debating about Ukraine, but I want to go back.
You got stuck on this whole idea that Russia is fascist. The deal is,
Well, they
you
are.
don't understand what fascism is.
No, but okay, so who is a more fascist? Who would you point to in today's political climate, not going back to the 30s, today in the world, who would you point to, which country, and say that they're more fascist than Russia? Because I can only think of like one or two.
One or two. What would those two be? Because honestly, I can't think of any fascist system.
So you can't think of any countries that are more fascist than Russia. So you're saying that it's the most fascistic?
No, I don't see any fascist countries exist.
Okay, but I just went over a bunch of the qualities that would define Russia as fascistic.
There's a lot, and yet no. It's not.
So you've just admitted to me that they're the on the spectrum
no,
of
I am not admitting that
hold
they
on
are the
on the spectrum on the spectrum of fascism from liberal democracy to outright fascist to totalitarian dictatorship, which I wouldn't even consider Russia to be a completely totalitarian dictatorship. They're on a spectrum. They're not exactly at the same level of Hitler yet, but the thing is, on the spectrum of fascism, you've said you can't think of any countries in the world that are more fascistic than Russia.
I can't think of any country that is fascistic.
Wait, the fascistic.
In the statement.
Okay, but even the Philippines even the Philippines,
fascism that has existed in the world is Franco Spain.
Okay, but
this is the 70s.
But this is dumb. That's like saying, hey, look, the only democracy in the world is the Democratic Republic of Congo because it's the only one that has democracy or democratic in its name. Like I'm not even sure if that's true, but like the logic that you're arguing is that because they don't officially call themselves fascist. No, but this is stupid. But this is stupid.
Thing is a democracy period in the world. Name one democracy. Name one real democracy.
Okay, well, I can name a lot. I can name the United States. I can name Canada. I can name Switzerland. I can name. Okay, so you're gonna say that because they're a republic, they're not a democracy. But again, this goes back to what I'm saying. So for example, the funny thing is, I also mentioned Switzerland, which is usually what the libertarians try to bring up and say, well, Switzerland's a democracy, but America isn't one. You don't even think that Switzerland's a democracy. You don't even think that Switzerland is a democracy. You don't think that Switzerland is a democracy. They have a direct democracy.
No, it is not a democracy.
Okay, but that's stupid, kiddo. How is it not? How is it not a democracy? They literally vote on basically everything in the country. This is stupid.
No. Think about what you just said. They don't. If they vote on basically everything in the country, they're not a democracy. They have to vote on everything in the country.
Oh, come on! So they have to vote what color. They have to vote what color towel each citizen's gonna use when they go in the shower today. I mean, come on, man! Your arguments are so tremendously goof-pilled. It's hard for me or anybody in my community to take you seriously when you make such absolute. So you don't believe. Look, I want to grill you on this. So you don't believe. You don't believe that there's a spectrum of democracy from like formal, they do elections but they're not really democratic like Hungary, to more democratic like America and stuff, to straight up direct democracy like Switzerland. You don't think that spectrum exists. You think you're either a complete democracy that votes on everything or you're not a democracy. That's your you
are not a full direct democracy where the citizens vote on every policy that comes up. You're not a democracy. You need to learn.
Oh my God, dude.
We in America.
So you don't believe in spectra? You don't actually believe in spectra? You don't think that there can be a spectrum where one country's more democratic than another? You think you're either 100%. That's like a step function to you. It's not a spectrum. It's a step function. You're either 100% democratic or you're not a democracy. That's it.
Yes, you're either 100% democracy or you're not.
So the reason why Russia,
America is a constitutional republic. Canada is, I don't even know what you frostbacks call your country. Don't
Frostbacks?
care.
I've never heard of that one.
Or
Frostback.
Wookiees.
That
Those are
almost
totally
sounds. That almost sounds like, I'm going to be real. That almost sounds like a little bit of a dog whistle comparing us to Mexicans. Whereas if you were to say that about Mexicans, the one they used to Mexicans, I'd actually have to kick you off of here because that's a slur. That's an outright slur. So I don't know. That's a little bit sketchy. Look. I'm going to keep it real with you. So you're dude who's like, you know, you've been to various countries in the world, you've been in the military and everything, you've got a long career, you're considerably older than me, and you're coming here to say that there's no such thing as a spectrum of democracy. You either have to be 100% democratic or you're not a democracy.
I said there's no such thing as a real democracy.
Okay, but that's like there's no there's no true communism. But that's like there's no true communism or no true socialism. That's stupid.
It's the ridiculous thing is everyone wants to say, oh, well, we're a democracy. No, we're not. We use democratic methods in order to elect our representatives. We are a Republican freaking constitutional country.
So a democratic republic. Okay, great. The Democratic Republic.
We're not a democratic republic. We use some democratic things. Otherwise, we wouldn't have things like the Electoral College, which is one of the liberals' freaking arguments against everything. We need more of a democracy. No.
Aircraft Sparky, has real democracy ever been tried before?
I believe it has in Greece.
Oh, really? Because women couldn't even vote there.
Okay.
Wait.
You think the world has to sit there
Hold on. You had to be a landowning male in the upper class in order to vote in Greece. Now, it was definitely better than the rest of the other civilizations at the time. Don't get me wrong, Greece was pretty ahead of their time. But we're also talking about a system where the vast majority of people weren't citizens and couldn't vote. And if you were born with a vagina, you could never vote. So your argument is because a very small select number of people voted on a bunch of stuff in a direct democratic way, they were a true democracy, even though women couldn't vote. But Switzerland, where women can vote, even though it took a very long time for them to be able to vote, I didn't think they could vote until the 80s or something insane, but they can now. A country where a lot more people are citizens, where a large percentage of the population are citizens and citizens can vote. They're not actually a real democracy. So your definition of a real democracy is one where hardly any people are enfranchised, and you're characterizing a country where a lot of people are franchised. In Switzerland, which is also direct democracy, is not democratic because they don't vote on literally everything. But the people of Athens, the citizens there, the male citizens that voted, they didn't vote on literally everything either, though. So I can't believe
to a real democracy that has ever existed, and to put modern day morality on historical deals just doesn't
modern
really work,
day
man.
Morality, but I'm a universalist. But you could say that it's a modern day morality to be against lynching black people. But if we were to go back to, say, the South in the 1800s, the early 1800s, it was actually seen as a morally good thing there. So would you say that was bad?
Was it considered a morally good thing then?
Well, they did it. Yeah, slave owners did it, and the states
I don't think
approved
they actually
of
call it as a morally good thing.
No, they said that they were doing slavery in the name of God. They thought that they were doing God's work on earth by the white man basically using the black man for their resources to glorify God and all this bull crap and everything.
I'm pretty sure that wasn't even a homogenous opinion there in the South.
Oh my God. Yeah, there were abolitionists in the South. There were also slave owners in the South.
Yeah,
there were also slave owners in the South.
Only 3% of Southern landowners were actually slavers. There was a lot of people who was actually against slavery in the South.
Okay, but the slavers
like that to be able to abolish
the slavers had the power. So my point is, what I'm trying to get at here is you're saying, well, we only care about women not being able to vote now because of modern day morality or whatever. My point is, from the standpoint of a democracy, if almost everybody can't be a citizen and you have to be a man to be a citizen, and that's the only way that you can vote, that's not actually a real democracy. Now, they're on a spectrum of a democracy. You can say that they're democratic, with the caveats that a bunch of people can't vote and all this type of stuff. I would actually put ancient Greece. What I would do is I would put ancient Greece, I would put ancient Athens on a spectrum of democracy. They're definitely democratic and definitely not a monarchy. But what I would do is I would put them on a spectrum of democracy, and I would actually have them behind Switzerland and the United States. I would say that Switzerland and the US are actually more democratic than Switzerland was, or than Greece was. And I would say that Switzerland more so, because far more people are able to actually participate in the process, and they vote in a direct way on policy. So I don't get this idea that the only true democracy was a civilization where hardly anybody could even partake in the process. Like, at that point, what good is it to even be democratic if most people don't even get a say, right?
So the idea that everyone completely gets a vote is a strictly modern ideal. In fact, that didn't even show up here in Americas until, I believe, what was it? Was it 1830s when they actually took away the requirement for land, and then you still didn't see women get the right to vote until around 1915 or something like that. And the main argument there was because they would be considered to be a lot of the feminists at that time who didn't want women to get the right to vote. They were actually talking about they didn't want to have to be able to be drafted and things like that. So the idea of women voting, actually a pretty new concept when it comes to human history.
But that goes to my point that it's a spectrum of democracy.
Actually use modern day morality on past events is kind of ridiculous when you're looking at, through a historical lens, what most closely matches the actual definitions of words. And I know you like to be fast and loose with the definition of words, but words have meanings, dude. So when you look at it in the historical context, people in Athens, Greece, were more democratic than any other time in history. And what they found is that it was highly, highly inefficient. And that's why they went away with it. That's why you see the Romans, they actually looked to the Greeks, and they had a good thing going, but they didn't have it right. And that's when they developed things like the Senate and the Republic of Rome.
Yeah, which is a superior system. But it doesn't make it not democratic. If you vote for senators, if you vote for, look, but the point that I'm trying to get at, you're accusing me of like throwing around words and stuff. But the funny thing is, you're defining a democracy only in its most purest form, which I would argue isn't even that pure. But that's dumb. So you're rejecting the spectrum. No. But look, what you're doing is you're rejecting the spectrum, and I think one of the reasons why you're doing it isn't so much about America per se, to disregard America as a democracy. It's so that you get to apply this in the other direction to say, well, is Russia really fascist? They're not 100% fascist. They're only, say, 86% fascist. So are they really fascist? No, there's no 100% fascist system. So I'm using that as an example, but they're obviously not at the level of Hitler or Mussolini in terms of formalizing fascism, but they're definitely on that spectrum. They're not on a spectrum of communism, and they're not on a spectrum of democracy. You could say maybe they're on a spectrum of formal democracy, but they're definitely fascistic. They're definitely anti-liberal. So my point is, there are spectra, and some countries can be more democratic than others. Some countries can have more direct democracy than others. Oftentimes, like America couldn't even do like Switzerland if they wanted to, because there's just too many people. And Athens, of course, had fewer people than Switzerland. So the fewer people you have, the easier a direct democracy is to manage. But that's why you need representative democracy. But my point is, there's a spectrum between formal, people vote, but it's illiberal, like Hungary, versus an American system with representatives, versus a Swiss system where cantons and stuff, they often have direct democracy. To me, that's a spectrum of democracy, but you're rejecting that by saying that none of them are democracies because they're not 100% the true democracy. But that sounds no different than a communist coming to me and trying to explain how Cuba or the Soviet Union isn't actually true socialism, and if they were in charge, they would have done it better. They would have done it better.
They were communist. But look, if you look at the spectrum of fascism, Franco would probably the weakest form of fascism by academic standards that existed, and Russia doesn't even reach that level.
Well, they did, but here's the problem. Here's the problem. So if Putin came out tomorrow and said, we are officially the fascist Russian Federation, and just said it's in the name now you can say, okay, well, they're a fascist country, but he didn't change any policies. All he changed was the name. Now you can say, okay, they're fascist. My point is, he does fascist policies. He has the fascist ethic. He has the fascist aesthetic. He has the fascist expansionism, all this crap, the fascist ultra-conservatism, the revanchism, the racial chauvinism, everything that you would expect with a fascist state, the anti-Semitism. He does all of that, but he doesn't have it in his name. Therefore, we can dismiss them as being fascist because, well, Mussolini called himself a fascist. Putin doesn't call himself a fascist. Really? That's so lame. I have a hard time thinking that you're even being serious with me right now, because if you're being honest with me, that would mean that you're incredibly stupid. So I'm leaning towards that you're disingenuous is what I'm going with at this point.
Okay. Yeah. I'm actually trying to see because I don't even think Marco branded himself as a fascist.
Marco? You mean Franco?
Yeah, Franco. Sorry.
Yeah, he was a fascist.
Did he call himself a fascist?
What does it matter, actually? Like that's the key. Here's the thing. You're all about the labels. You have to call yourself a fascist to be a fascist. You have to call yourself.
I'm not saying that. You're saying that, and that's the
but
problem.
I'm not. I'm arguing there's a spectrum. I'm arguing that there are spectra to politics, that somebody can be more democratic than somebody else, but that doesn't mean that they're not both democracies. In fact, here's the thing, right? Hungary, yes, they're fascistic. They're also technically an illiberal democracy. They're also technically a formal democracy. So in fact, Hungary is on a spectrum of democracy, not very far on it. They're also on a spectrum of fascism, not quite as far as where Russia is, nowhere near where Hitler was, but definitely more on the direction of Franco than, say, on the direction of Switzerland. My point is that there are spectra to these things, and you wanting to have absolute labels with strict definitions, and if you don't 100% mean that you can dismiss it. Ultimately, what it allows you to do is to humanize the Putin regime and dismiss the charges of their fascistic behavior. And I think it's gross. But you also did say that China was communist. You said that they're communists. Well, they call themselves communists. So I guess by your logic, China must be communist. I wouldn't even say that they're totally communist. I would say that they're socialists trying to build communism by using capitalist investment to establish the material conditions to transition from an agrarian society to a communist society where everybody is equal under the great leader. That's what I believe that they're trying to do. And it would be a terrible system to live under. I guess my point, though, is that reality has many shades of gray, a lot of nuance. And
here's the reason why I'm actually focused on this kind of stuff, because one of the things that you like to do, I follow you on Twitter. I watch some of the stuff you write, and you're like, oh, these people are fascist. This is fascist. That is fascist. And they're not. They may be on the spectrum of fascism, but they're not fascist.
Okay, who?
God, let me go to
name a group, and I can tell you how they're fascistic.
I think you mentioned Iran as fascist.
Yes, thank you. Because when you asked me earlier, and we didn't get to do this, that there were two countries that I could qualify as fascist, that more fascist than Russia, I'll give you that answer now. Islamofascist Iran and then Ba'athist Syria, I would say, are definitely more fascistic than Russia. But the thing is, obviously, Russia is an ally of Syria. I got an answer for you about Iran, because you asked how is Iran fascist, or you said, well, I said that Iran was fascist, and you're obviously disagreeing with that. I actually wrote a response because I had a debate with a guy who was shilling for the Iranian regime, a guy, Michael Hilliard, who was defending them and saying how we should be closer with them. He was defending Obama and his stupid deal and all that stuff and everything, and he was being a very pompous, kind of academically lecturing me, even though we have the same degree and all this type of stuff. It was pretty embarrassing behavior on his part, and even a lot of Dylan Burns' audience were turned off by his smuggery and all that stuff. He laughed at the notion that Iran was fascist, and so I laid out a few reasons for why I would consider them fascistic, or in that case, I compared them. I actually straight up, I didn't just call them fascist. I actually compared them to the OG 100% fascist Nazi Germany, which is, I'm not even doing that with Russia. I'm not saying that Putin's on the level of Hitler. What I was saying about Iran was that here's how they're like Nazi Germany. The anti-Semitism, they both want to kill Jews, millions of Jews, with weapons of mass destruction. Hitler did it with chemical weapons. Iran is trying to do it with nuclear weapons. They both invade their neighbors for territory, blood, resources, all that stuff, glory of the empire, everything else. Hitler, obviously, as you know, invaded a bunch of countries, declared war on America. Iran is invaded a bunch of countries and doing a bunch of wars across the Middle East, from Yemen to Lebanon, basically, and propping up their puppet states. They are deeply ultra conservative and racially chauvinist. The great Persian people, the great Aryan people, you know, the idea that they're superior to Arabs. It's funny, as much as they talk about injustice in Palestine, they don't actually care about the Palestinians. They think of them as dirty Arabs. They just care about their own imperial glory. They care about propping up Shiites, and they know that the Palestinians are Sunnis. They don't actually care about them. They just use them as a pawn against the Jews. And of course the intermingling of the religion and the state. And then, and this is a key component of fascism too, the direction of the economy and enterprise by the supreme leader and the state. And so in all of these ways, Iran is fascistic. They're definitely fascist. They're comparable to Nazi Germany. They're a wannabe Nazi Germany. If they had the same powers and position in the world as Germany, they'd be killing a lot more people. And additionally, they're actually more fascistic than Russia by far. But I would say that Russia's on a spectrum. I'd say that, but just because Iran is more fascistic doesn't negate Putin. So there, I just answer you. You criticize me calling them fascists. They're Islamofascists.
So I look at them more as along the lines of a theocracy. And one thing that I thought was really interesting is the fact that you actually acknowledge that they identify themselves as Aryan, because Iran in Pashto actually means Aryan.
I know. Hitler had a lot of his stuff came out of Iran and northern India, right? So yeah.
No, you're highly accurate on that. I look at it as more as a theocracy. You look at it as fascism. Okay, you look where we both, everything you said about how they act and everything, true. Okay, fascism has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. That was something that really only existed primarily in Germany. You didn't see that in Spain. You didn't really see that in Italy either. Fascism, where the OG fascism exists, is Mussolini's Spain. He was the one that actually coined the phrase. He's the one that developed the system. But Hitler actually took a lot of cues off of Mussolini and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I would push back on the anti-Semitism. You don't think that Franco's Spain or Mussolini's India ran?
Always existed. Anti-Semitism existed primarily in Europe because of the nature of the work that the Jewish had to do. Because under fundamentalism Christianity, things such as lending money was not something that Christians can do. If you wanted to charge any interest, you could not do that under fundamental Christianity. Okay, the same reason why you see Jewish people getting into banking in areas like the Middle East is for the same freaking reason. Look, there's one thing you could say about the Jewish people is they got in where they could fit in as much as they could. That's also why you see a lot of people in the Jewish community become lawyers, because since they are highly persecuted, they actually learn the law, they study the law, and they use the law to protect themselves in the communities. This is just a historical fact. So this is why you see heavy Jewish population in some of these certain deals. Now, the whole idea about entertainment, that's more of a modern thing. I don't care about that. But anti-Semitism has existed in Europe for quite a long time, primarily based on the professions that they had. No one likes paying bills. And if you can sit there and demonize a group of people who you owe money to, it makes it easier. Look, when I was over in Iraq, when I was over in Afghanistan and stuff, we demonized the hell out of those people so we could do what we had to do. It is it's human nature. The less
Wait, which
human you
people?
feel they
Let's
are.
just be clear. Which people? We're talking about terrorists, insurgents, or are we talking
Yeah,
about? Okay.
terrorists, insurgents, whatever you want to call them.
Just clarifying, because somebody
Yeah.
might think you were talking about Jews. So I'm not
No,
saying you're saying.
no. I am a Jew.
Okay.
So it is what it is, man. But no, I'm so I hold 2 degrees. I hold a degree in communications, which is a sociological study of messaging and yada yada yada. And I also hold a degree in Middle Eastern history, something
Okay.
I'm rather interested in. Look, I get hung up on the whole fascist. Look, Russia, they're authoritarian as fuck. They're bad. Agreed. We can agree on that. Okay. I disagree on the whole fascism deal because where they may have some spectrum of fascism, they're not there yet. Now they may move over to that. Where I see Iran, they're more of a theocracy. Okay, it's an authoritarian theocracy. Now Syria, I agree. Syria is actually more true fascist than any of the other places that you've called tonight. Okay, look, the Assad regime, terrible. The things they do, the way they interact economically, everything else, they actually fit the fascistic model more than any other country. I don't know and I haven't spent enough time in Syria to really get a good feel. I've been there in support of some actions back in the day, but I didn't get a good feel because I wasn't there long enough. When I was over in Turkey, I got a good feel pre-Erdogan what their country was like. I learned a lot about their culture and everything. Got to visit places, meet individuals, things like that. When I was over in Afghanistan, I made sure to interact with the local people as much as we could. Look, it was about hearts and minds. It was also trying to get them to see us differently so they could actually humanize us. So maybe they try to stop shooting at us. But when we look at things going on with Ukraine, okay, the reason why I think America needs to stay out of it is because it is not in our national interest at this moment. And primarily, if there wasn't any threat of China moving across the Strait of Taiwan, I might actually agree with you. But to sit there and go, we can walk and chew bubblegum at the same time, my guy, you're talking to someone who has worked multiple different battlefront lines in a multitude of campaigns that were going on simultaneously. There are wars that are going on right now that they don't talk about, such as the American participation in the Civil War in Sudan, the war against drugs in frickin' Chile, all these unofficial military.
Right, but those are very small deployments of U.S. forces, though.
Hold on. So on top of doing that, they were also doing the GWAT, the Global War on Terrorism, which basically gave the United States a fucking golden ticket to go into any country, any place that we find terrorism. That's why we have been permanently deployed in the Philippines since 9/11. We were in Afghanistan, I believe it was October when we first landed there after September 11th.
Yeah.
I was part of the first wave, and then shortly after we went into Iraq with under the notions of MWDs, which by the way did exist. They just didn't happen to change the labeling on it. All the munitions still said property of the U.S. because we sold them the fucking mustard.
But that's not true. Okay, but hold on. But that's not true. I gotta stop you there. That's not true. Saddam, look, to the extent that the United States provided Saddam with military support, it was motivated by the Iran-Iraq war.
Yeah, where, the 10-year war.
Yeah, well, an 8-year war, and the United States in that war provided diplomatic support and intelligence. It basically showed Saddam where the Iranian positions were, and Saddam gassed Iranians. He gassed Iranian forces. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. This is why I gotta push back. This is why I gotta push back a little bit on this. Saddam's arms suppliers, though, were largely the Soviet Union and France. And he got his chemical weapons from the Soviet Union and France. So
post-70, you're actually right. Post-70s, you are right. The people who actually put Saddam in power happened to be the United States of America.
Okay, well, I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about chemical weapons.
We're the ones that primarily supplied them munitions and stuff for their artillery and stuff like that. while they were engaged against Iran, because Iran was holding U.S. Americans hostage. With the overthrow of the Shah, America had vested interest in, because hey, Texas Instruments and stuff like that actually had some of their main factories over in Iran.
Okay.
Prior to the Shah taking over and everything, Iran was actually a bustling westernized state.
You mean the Ayatollah taking over?
Yeah,
because,
the Ayatollah,
yeah, because Iran under the Shah was great. It was a very westernized place.
It was. In fact, if you look at, you can see pictures of how women dressed then.
Yeah.
Versus now, they're night and freaking day. Now you see them in the burqas, not the not just hijabs. I mean, hijabs would be nice for those people. No,
I know.
Have to wear the entire burqa and everything else. It's
I know.
Ridiculous.
But
Islam is a death cult. But when you see what was going on geopolitically during that time, yes, we actually sold them a lot of chemical weapons. America had a huge stockpile of chemical weapons even after signing the treaty back after World War One. We still held a huge stockpile of it, and we got rid of a lot of it right around the 70s. Yeah,
okay, but you're talking about the Iran-Iraq war, and the fact of the matter is, during the Iran-Iraq war, Saddam's major supporter was the Soviet Union militarily, and his second major arms supplier was France. It was not the United States. The United States, the CIA. Here's what the CIA did: they helped Saddam with the targeting. Which, again, look, I've argued was the good thing. Saddam was the lesser evil compared to Iran. It made Saddam look like a democracy in comparison. Both very bad guys, but, where would I rather live under, basically? It's kind of like Hitler and the Soviet Union. It's like both very bad, but there's a lesser evil there. And then you can deal with Saddam afterwards, after Iran's dealt with. But the thing is, the fact of the matter is, and as you even said, okay, but we're talking about 1970s. We're talking about years before the war started. But Saddam's arms suppliers were France and the U.S. They were the Soviet socialist bloc. They weren't America. They weren't the capitalist world, right?
So Soviets actually delivered a lot of hardware when it came to munitions and stuff like that in the 70s. America actually supplied a good bulwark of that, including artillery pieces. By the way, the majority of chemical weapons that they're ever going to be delivered, they're going to be delivered via artillery, because chemical weapons, the dispersion area and stuff usually is not all that wide. You want to be more pinpoint. It's easier to do that with artillery than it is to actually drop munitions from an aircraft. Artillery is the primo way to deliver chemical weapons. So that's the reason why. Now we sold them munitions. I didn't say we sold them arms. You can actually fire American rounds out of Soviet freaking.
Yeah. No, fair enough. Fair enough.
A 105 millimeter is a 105. It is what it is. So that's what I'm talking about. Now, when we actually went into Baghdad and stuff, we actually found chemical weapons there. The problem is they were still stenciled with U.S. Army on it.
Okay, but what's the problem with that?
What's the problem with that?
My issue is it's kind of like saying, well, when we went into the Cold War, say the Cold War ever went hot, we found some stuff in the Soviet Union and it was from U.S. Lend-Lease. It's like, but that doesn't mean that Stalin's like a good guy. My point is he was an ally, he was a partner, and now he's not anymore.
I'll be glad to answer that. Okay. The reason why I find it to be a problem that we went into Iraq, when it happened, I was very pro Iraq. I was in the service. I was like, hell's yeah, maybe we can end Northern and Southern Watch. Maybe we can stop the forever deployments that are affecting the morale of the United States military service. Because for 12 to 13 years prior, there has constantly been a presence of the United States in Turkey, in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait. We still have a long-lasting presence in Kuwait, UAE, Qatar.
Right, because of Iran.
Yeah, because of Iran. But the Southern and Northern Watch campaigns was actually causing a lot of problems overall with the military. And look, the military is still having bad problems with things like divorce and things like that. Constant deployments, it affects the family life. It makes the life of the soldier worse overall. Now, I was all for the Iraq war, But we went under there under the false pretense of MWDs were going to be utilized against American soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines abroad.
I just want to clarify. When you say MWDs, you mean WMDs, and you're referring to nuclear. You're referring to nuclear weapons, but the point.
No. Chemical is also in WMDs.
Oh, wait. So you're admitting that he actually did have WMDs?
Yeah, he did have WMDs.
So then Colin Powell did not lie then. George W. Bush did not lie.
No. But the idea that it was going to be used against American soldiers, there's no evidence to support that. It's just like when the State Department came out, what was it, yesterday, and the journalist pushed against, well, where's your proof of this? Well, I said it. No, that's not good enough. Look, we knew that they possessed chemical weapons. We knew because we sold it to them. Okay. Just like when we kicked off the Iraq War, we didn't allow any French personnel to leave the base because we were more concerned with them delivering their Mirages and shit to frickin' Iraq, because we know that they have broken arms treaties where they were not supposed to sell weapons to Iraq. So we actually held them as a nice prisoner. They had freedom to go about the facilities, but they could not leave the base nor take off their equipment and fly back to France. Even though they were a UN and NATO ally, we knew they were doing shady shit behind us.
I'm a critic of France. I'm not like a big France fanboy. I am always critical of them on my show and how they undermine Western foreign policy interests, all that type of stuff. I guess my point is, by your logic, if a hot war broke out, say with the Soviet Union and the United States, and people go into the Soviet Union and find stuff, in factories and everything, and what do they find? They find trucks that were made in America, right? Because there was Lend-Lease against Hitler. Like the U.S. was, people don't talk about this. They always like to say how the Soviets did all the work. No, the Red Army got their food from America and they got their trucks from America. They were Ford trucks. So if you go in, so my point that I'm trying to get at is somebody can be a partner one day and then an enemy the next day. So when Iraq in 2003 was not fighting Iran, they were not a useful partner anymore. They had gassed their own people. They were going to gas more Kurds. That state was brutal as it was anyway, but it was especially bad going into the 80s, 90s, 2000s. My point is, look, the fact that he had the weapons, the fact that he had the WMDs in and of itself is a threat, because you might not think that he might use them against U.S. troops, but we knew that he had lobbed Scuds at Israel. We also knew that he had the capacity to attack U.S. bases in the region. And so you might want to neutralize that threat. And so I don't think it's that extraordinary now, because look, a lot of people have said to me, they said, look, Kevin, they should have framed it from helping the Kurds or whatever. That wouldn't have elicited as much support as saying this is about securing our own security in the region. And so for me, if it takes making the personal security argument to get the support for the war that's needed, then I'm all for that, because the consequence of that war was Iraq is no longer under the yoke of the Saddam Hussein regime. They don't have WMDs anymore. Those are gone now. They're not attacking their neighbors. They're not harboring terrorists. They're not doing any of this sort of crap. They actually have a chance at a democracy. Now, to the extent that they work with some very bad militias and proxies through Iran, that's because the U.S. didn't deal with Iran. George W. Bush should have dealt with Iran as well. That's my main criticism of Bush. He let Iran stay in power. So my whole deal about the Iraqi war, in hindsight's always 2020. Iraq actually posed zero threat to America. But you admit they had WMDs. You admit
they had WMDs, but that doesn't mean that they were a threat.
Okay, but you admit that they weren't necessarily favorable to the U.S., right? And U.S. bases in Saudi Arabia, U.S. allies in Israel, and U.S. bases in Kuwait were all within range of Saddam's WMD arsenal, right? If he wanted to use Scuds and artillery, he could hit U.S. bases.
If they wanted to use Scuds have an effective range where they could at least hit Riyadh from firing them from Baghdad. They had the capability. They had the capability to hit Jerusalem and stuff like that, but they posed no threat. There was no Scud. There has been no Scud launches since the 90s
Okay.
after Desert Storm and anything like that. And this is my criticism. We lost thousands of soldiers over what essentially was a vendetta with Junior against Saddam because Saddam actually threatened his father following the Iraq War.
Yeah, that's a little conspiratorial, right? So we know, we actually know. No. This is a documented fact. We know that the death toll of the Saddam regime, when Saddam was a partner, when he wasn't a partner, on average, his regime killed about 3,000 people every month that he was in power for 24 years. If the Iraq War to take him out, nobody really talks about this. They always hype up huge numbers, which is mostly the insurgency, but the war to remove him from power only saw 20,000 casualties, or 20,000 fatalities, I should say, and it actually only lasted about 2 months to oust him from power. That saved just doing that war in March. If you waited to do that war, say in January of the next year, that regime would have killed more people than died in the war to take him out. But you're telling me is you don't actually give a shit about the 25 million people that had to live under the Ba'athist tyranny. You don't care about them. So
no, I care about Americans and Americans only.
Yeah, see that's the thing. So why? So if democracy doesn't matter there, why does it matter in America? Why does it matter in America if it doesn't matter in Iraq?
Okay, so like I said at the beginning, the U.S. soldier, sailor, airman, marine, they all sit there and raise their right hand, and they give the same oath to uphold and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic,
and to obey the commander-in-chief. The commander-in-chief sent them to Iraq.
So they sign up to defend their country. They don't sit there. They don't sign up to liberate other countries.
Unless the commander-in-chief, No, this is bullshit. If you join the military, don't surprise Pikachu face me when your commander-in-chief tells you that you're going to liberate a regime. That was definitely in American interest. How is it not? Iraq had a shot at democracy. Iraq and the Kurds in particular, a natural U.S. ally, had a very westernized...
You think they had a shot at democracy? That's
well,
funny.
They still do. So here's the thing. Here's the thing. If you join the military, don't fucking surprise Pikachu face me when you're being sent into battle. What do you want? U.S. troops to get paid to sit around on a base in Georgia and do nothing? You're a superpower. You could go and work literally any other job. You could go and work at McDonald's and not do that. If you sign up and get paid, don't be shocked when the president, says, okay, well, now you have to uphold your end of the contract. We give you your food and your money and your housing. Now you serve your country and you follow your commander-in-chief. And the commander-in-chief was George W. Bush, and George W. Bush took out an absolute menace that harbored terrorists, committed all manner of human rights abuses, possessed weapons of mass destruction, which you've admitted in contravention of treaties on that matter. Also tried to get nuclear weapons, and if it weren't for Israel, would have likely succeeded at getting them. This was a guy who invaded his neighbors. This was a guy who invaded Kuwait, had designs on attacking Israel, and very much, as you've even admitted, had the capacity to attack U.S. bases in the future. So why not neutralize the threat? And I'll tell you this, I'm making a humanitarian argument for the most part there. I'll tell you this, even if I didn't give a shit about a single Iraqi, I still would have taken out Iraq because I'd rather take them out than wait for them to attack my bases down the road if they decide they're going to do what they did again. Go into Kuwait, go attack Israel, etc. Saddam was no friend of America. He was far closer to France, and he was far closer to the Soviet Union, during all of that than he ever was to America.
Are you done yet?
I'm basically done now. Okay, I do want to get back to Ukraine, though.
Hold on. Okay, look, it's very simple. Look, like I said, then I supported it. Looking back on it, no, not so much. Look, what we should have done is what initially happened. We went into Afghanistan. We realized that dude wasn't in Afghanistan. We should have fucking DD'd the fuck out of there. We should have not done anything. The whole idea of nation building in Islamic State is not anything that the West can ever do.
But it wasn't really about that. It was about stopping the Taliban from reconfiguring with Al Qaeda, right?
Hold on. So no, actually, the whole idea when we went in there with the stated fact we were going to find those responsible for the planning of 9/11. We were going to fucking kill them, and then we were going to move the fuck out. No, instead, we went in there. We stayed there for about 3 months. Figured out after some stupid fucking lieutenant mentioned around CNN that we were tracking OBL through his fucking cell phone, and that's done by the RC-135U, by the way, is how that was done. We could do that under miles of fucking ground. It's amazing. After that was accidentally leaked in CNN, of course, the Classified News Network did what they always do, and they leaked exactly what we were doing. OBL went dark. Once we realized that he was no longer in Afghanistan, we should have fucking left them to kill each other. Who gives a shit? Why? Because we are not there to liberate people. We
Hold
are there
on.
to fucking kill
Even if you didn't.
No.
No, this is bullshit.
You shut the fuck up right now.
Do you understand the concept of an accomplice to a crime? So if you're a driver and the passenger is the one that does a drive-by shooting and kills your daughter, let's say that there's a car out there. Let's say you got a daughter, she's walking down the street. There's a car, gangbangers. They drive by, they shoot her, they cap her, or whatever, and then they go to court. And you're in court, and they're prosecuting all these guys. But then your logic would say, I want the passenger riding shotgun who shot her to go to prison for life or get the death penalty. But the driver, the guy that was an accomplice, he can go free. That's your logic to the Taliban, because Al-Qaeda never would have been able to do what they did if they did not have a safe haven provided to them by the Taliban. So what makes you think the Taliban wouldn't have done the same shit? They hate America.
Hold on. Stop right there. Because I gotta ask you this. Why haven't we attacked Pakistan?
Because Pakistan, well, I would have attacked Pakistan, absolutely, but Pakistan has nukes.
Not attack Pakistan?
Yeah, well, Pakistan has nukes. It's a little bit harder to deal with Pakistan unless you're literally nuke-pilled like I am, right? So
Pakistan is our fucking bitch over there, and they will do
not really though, not really. And you know that the Cold War friendly relations with Pakistan dried up in the early 1990s. You know that the Taliban was actually founded in Pakistan. The current leader of Pakistan supports the Taliban. Imran Khan is no friend of or subservient to the West. He's his own dude. And Pakistan.
So if we really cared about the driver, if you will, we would have went into Pakistan.
So okay, why not? That's a pro-war argument, though. That's not an anti-war argument. That's a pro-war argument.
So the idea is we should have went in, did what we were supposed to do, and fucking left. We should have not spent 20 fucking years in that shithole.
That's not a sustainable
in fucking Iraq.
But that's not a sustainable. But that's not a sustainable approach, because if you just go in there and then leave the second that Bin Laden's gone, you know what it's like. It's like, let's say that you've got a company like let's say Goldman Sachs or whatever, and I know a lot of people on the right and the left are very upset about Goldman's corruption. I've been critical of Goldman Sachs, but like, let's say that the CEO of Goldman Sachs, he either passes away or he steps down. Do we get to say, oh, problem solved, we don't have to worry about Goldman Sachs corruption anymore? No, because they'll just get another CEO. So your idea, just go in and get Bin Laden, guess what? They'll just get another leader. Unless you actually systemically change the conditions on the ground so that terror safe havens are no longer possible, such as by investing in the new Afghan Republic or going in and taking out the Pakistani government and actually setting up long-lasting democracies that are free and independent. Those are the only safeguard you're going to have to actually stop terrorism. You actually have to westernize those countries. And if you don't, guess what? You'll leave, and then they'll have a new leader in the Khani network or something, and they'll work with the Taliban or Afghanistan and Pakistan. And then guess what? Now you got another 9/11. Now everybody wants to go back. Now you go in again, and now you have to start from scratch. Why not just finish the job once and for all, have a permanent base there at Bagram, have a eventually wealthy and prosperous westernized country in Afghanistan that'll look like the UAE and stuff? Why not actually change the world and forge the world in your own image, as opposed to having to just go back every time they attack you?
So the problem is fundamental Islam and the Western societal morals are not compatible whatsoever.
I don't
Hate to break it to you.
disagree. I don't disagree, but look at Afghanistan. By 2021, 28% in a deeply conservative Islamic country, 28% of the parliament was women. So we were definitely westernizing them.
We put them in place.
But that's not true. They actually had a democracy, though. Are you arguing that they were all just appointed or selected by the U.S.?
No, they weren't all just appointed. But I assure you, the United States had a lot to do with the elections and who was elected. In fact, they only allowed certain people to run. Yes.
Well, yeah, you don't want Taliban people to run. You don't want
the idea of any form of democracy in Afghanistan was a fucking farce. It does not exist. It is not something that is compatible with Islam.
It doesn't have to be. But it doesn't have to be like a serious democracy. I support the Shah, for example. He wasn't a Democrat, but he definitely did a good thing for women's rights in Afghanistan. Look,
but he also.
What's wrong with having puppets?
So he wasn't a fundamentalist. He wasn't a fundamentalist of Islam at all.
Neither was Ghani.
He was more like what Turkey was, which was considered more of a secular society.
Okay.
Erdogan took over. But Erdogan come in, and he's a fundamentalist. He actually changed the way Turkey sees itself these days.
Okay, so you think Karzai
NATO today?
So you think Karzai was like a fundamentalist Islamist, just like the Ayatollah, just like Osama bin Laden?
No, but there was a lot of fundamentalists there, and until
so why not have a puppet to keep them down? Why not have a puppet to keep them down?
So what should have happened, what didn't happen, is you had to kill all the warlords. We didn't do it. We should have done it. Okay, if you really wanted Afghanistan to actually gain its own identity, first thing you'd have to do is you have to commit genocide.
No, but you understand that they had to defeat the Taliban first before you could solve these other issues. Look, I'm not saying that the warlords were great, but a lot of them worked with the Western forces against the Taliban.
No, they would work with Western forces for 1 minute, and they would turn around and change it the next.
Some of them, sure, yeah.
So what really happens is who was paying them is who they had more loyalty to at that moment. Fuck all of them. We should have actually taken care of them and done away with them because they were a problem, plain and simple. But no, we wanted to do something. We wanted to try to westernize these people. No, they didn't want to be westernized. They didn't even see themselves as a country.
Then why did they jump from planes when the Taliban tried to take over? Look, if they hate the West so much and they don't want to be like the West, then why, when the Taliban came into Kabul, did millions of people try to flee to the airport, and those that got in?
You're talking about a generation of people who didn't know any different than American occupation.
So, you're admitting that it worked. You're admitting that the westernization was actually working. You're admitting that it was actually working. You're admitting that those people were moderated, that they would have grown up to be fundamentalists in a backwater, and instead they grew up to just be moderate Muslims with normal jobs that wouldn't be that out of place in an American city. And when the Taliban came in, they some of them lost their lives trying to escape. And what I can't get over is just your absolute disregard for anybody outside your own goddamn arbitrary borders. And I'll tell you this. Here's the irony in all of this. You can say you don't care about the people there. I get you. But the great irony is that by focusing so much on your own borders and nothing outside of it, you actually make your own country more insecure, because as much as you want to close your eyes and pretend that the terrorists don't matter and that they're not a threat, they can still see America, and they will still connive and plot against America, and you not being there in their background, messing up their operations, ultimately gives the advantage to them. And so the great irony of isolationism is that it's branded as America first. It's branded as America first, and yet it puts America last, because these policies of withdrawal, these policies of surrender, these policies of retreat ultimately render America less secure and guarantee another 9/11 perpetrated by Al Qaeda and the Taliban in coordination with the Al-Qaeda network, which is all still intact. Taking out bin Laden did not remove the threat. They just got a new CEO. Just like the CEO of Goldman stepping down doesn't solve corruption. They just have a new CEO. That you actually have to stay the course. And guess what? The global war on terror is a centuries-long war. And if you're not up for it, great. Don't be in the military. Get another job. Simple as that. Simple as that.
So here's the deal. I'm not an isolationist. I just am tired of forever military interventions. We've been doing it for way too long, and
we're gonna have to go back now and start from scratch and start it all over again. That's a forever war. Once they do another 9/11.
No, because if we're smart, we'll just go in there and we'll just firebomb everything.
Oh, just genocide all the people on the ground. Is that what you're advocating for?
When you go to war, you go there, you kill people, and you break their shit, and you move on.
Hold on. So you would do total war campaign tactics like what they did against Japan, against Afghanistan in an asymmetric war. You just firebomb everybody, man, women, children, terrorists, innocent alike, right?
Did I stutter when I said that Islam is incompatible with Western society?
Oh, hold on a second. So by your logic, hold on. I just want to get you on the record here. It's okay. Just want to get you on the record. So what you're arguing is that if they're Muslim and a terror threat comes out of their country, we should just go in and just napalm, nuke, firebomb, whatever the fuck, all the people there because they're all muzzies, right? Is that what we're getting at?
I do like that word, but no, they don't have to be Muslims. Anyone that we go to war with, we should just go in, kill everything, and move on.
Okay, so okay. I just want you to understand there are 40 million people. I just want you to understand. So there are 40 million people in Afghanistan. About 80,000 to 100,000. It's probably more now, though, are associated with the Taliban now that they're in charge. Mm-hmm. It's probably far higher than that now, but still, it's less than 1% of the population is Taliban. And then there's Al Qaeda. There's a few operatives of Al Qaeda with the Al-Qaeda network, and then you got some ISIS-K guys, ISIS Khorasan province, and they're operating in Afghanistan. So less than 1% of the country is objectively a terrorist or affiliated with terrorists. But let's say another 9/11 does happen. So your strategy to retaliate is just kill 40 million people, basically bug spray, kill all of them alike. No differentiation. Indiscriminate.
So when we were on the ground, if they carried a weapon, we would leave them alone until they raised it. The moment they raised it, we engaged. That was the ROE then. That's what should have been the ROE for the entire time. But no, it eventually turned over to things like they got to fire at you at least 3 times before you can return fire. Okay,
well, I'm against that.
Okay, so when you go into an area, what it should be is anyone that is armed, you fucking kill them and you move on.
Oh, okay, but it kind of sounded like you were. It didn't sound like you were. No. But the statements. But the statements.
Yeah, bombing entire villages. I don't care.
Oh, okay. I just want to clarify because the statements.
I have no problem with that because that's the way war actually happens. It's the way it should happen.
Well, that's the way that total war, right? Like a total nuclear war that would happen. Yeah. But
so you don't half-ass it.
Okay. I just want to clarify where you're coming from. So, like, let's say that there's another 9/11, and we know that the Khani network was behind it, and it was facilitated by the Taliban government in Kabul, and they attacked, let's say, Chicago, and they killed 2,500 Americans, and they're dead now. Would you nuke Kabul, or what would you do? How would you prosecute that war effort? How would you do it any differently than Bush did? Because it sounds like you're just saying, just bomb it.
Yeah.
So would you carpet bomb? Would you nuke a bunch of Moabs? What would you do?
The Moabs were actually pretty cool. Those were cool when they were dropped.
But Moabs on cities
are really good. Yeah, why not?
Okay. And what if I told you that there were, let's say, 60,000 Taliban guys in Kabul, and there's 6.5 million people in Kabul, but you're gonna Moab the place, and we're gonna kill 2 million people, and we'll get out all of the Taliban infrastructure. But we're going to we're going to have a civilian casualty rate of about 98 to 99%. Is that acceptable to you?
Oh, do you understand the law of proportionality in war?
Hold on. I actually disagree with proportionality. I argue that that nuking Hiroshima and Nagasaki was justified. over Pearl Harbor.
Okay. So the idea, well, actually, the nuking of Hiroshima and Nagasaki was justified. In fact, no one would ever act like it wasn't, except for
I debated a guy who
some
disagreed.
hippies.
Okay.
There's some people who are just like, no, we should have never done it. Yeah, no, we had to do that to dismantle the manufacturing capability of Japan. That's why
I
we
agree.
picked those two cities first. And then the third one, we dropped leaflets over Tokyo, and the emperor finally said, okay, because we dropped leaflets for 2 days over both those sites before we nuked them on the third day. When we started doing that in Tokyo, the emperor said, oh, shit.
Well, yeah, but even then, half of the high command didn't want to surrender. But anyway, so
No.
we're in alignment on Japan. But my point is, it doesn't have to be a total war, though. So
it doesn't have to be. But if you actually if you dry erased an entire fucking city where you had people bunkered in and everything else, using them as shields, much like Hamas, which, by the way, I've seen the IDF actually drop mortars right inside of a freaking hospital because they were firing mortars from the top of that hospital.
Oh,
that's
okay.
actually considered legal.
Yeah,
but legal under Geneva Convention.
Yeah, you have a right to retaliate against people firing at you. I guess my point is, if you kill 40 million people to take out 100,000, though, and it's not a total nuclear war, I don't see why. Like you don't like, okay, so in Japan, one of the reasons why I said you got to do what Truman did is because you had a conscript army. Now you have a volunteer army and people that know what they're signing up for. I don't see why you can't just send boots on the ground or precision strikes, take out the Taliban, and then actually try to rectify the situation. Your policy is just nuke them all, basically.
So the idea of precision strikes is actually kind of a farce too, because the U.S. military precision that you're referring to, I mean, it is precise by most modern warfare standards, but it's not to the actual pinpoint that you're probably alluding to.
I'm contrasting against carpet bombing, which you were basically advocating for.
Yeah, carpet bombing is when you actually just level an entire square mile. I mean,
yeah, which you just advocated for. You said level a whole village.
I have no problem with dropping 170,000 pounds of wonderful steel rain. I have no issues with it. There's nothing wrong with it. If you have a compound and they're using humans as shields, yes, you do it.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify. So rather than sending in some spec ops to go in and take out the bad guys and free the hostages, your approach is just nuke the hostages. Life is not
Call of Duty, my guys. Spec ops guys do not actually operate to the efficiency that you would think they do.
I'm not saying they're not going to kill civilians. Obviously, there's going to be collateral damage, but your approach would have a far higher collateral damage than.
I would rather risk less American lives.
But they're volunteers; they're not conscripts. They sign up.
Doesn't matter. No, they don't sign up to be killed.
They don't sign up to be killed. But a lot. Look, when Trump pulled out, pulled out of Somalia and northeastern Syria, the troops on the ground there were pissed. They didn't want to die, but they believed in the mission. Your approach is, well, the mission is just nuke them all, and yeah, the civilians and everything, they go up in flames too. I can't believe what I'm hearing right now. This only makes sense in a total nuclear war. But we're not talking about the Taliban nukes America.
I can break all this down for you. So the majority of the people in Somalia and Syria, the ones you were talking that were upset, the reason why they were upset, the same reason why I was upset when we pulled out of Afghanistan, is because we didn't actually pull out our allies, the people that actually helped us out. We didn't pull them out. Those are the people they care about. They don't give a fuck about any of the rest of them.
Okay, but you have to understand that in northeastern Syria, we're talking about a population of hundreds of thousands of Kurds. We're not talking about a few informants or a few translators. We're talking about a national project in northeastern Syria to actually set up Kurdistan for the first time, to actually give the Kurdish people a state. And you're saying that the troops that were there, they were fine with leaving, but they wanted the U.S. to evacuate all the Kurds. How would you even do that?
All the Kurds? No, they didn't want them to pull out all the Kurds, and I'll tell you why. Because the majority of the Kurds down in northern Syria are fucking legit terrorists. But there
legit terrorists. Wait.
Yeah.
So you're going to say they're like what? PKK? What type of terrorists? Are they ISIS? What are we talking about? A terrorist.
They're not to the level of ISIS, but yeah, the good bit of the Kurds in northern Syria are terrorists. Yes.
Really? And where's your evidence for this?
Just look it up, man. Just
no. But I have looked up Rojava. I've looked up that the PKK does operate. The PKK does do terrorism. But you're saying that you said either a large number or a great number of the Kurds in that area. We're talking tens of thousands, 50,000 plus, are
the
terrorists.
Fighters. Yeah, there's a lot of fighters there that are PKK.
Okay, but those fighters are fighting ISIS, right?
Not all. Yeah, they're on our side for now, and. Manuel Noriega was one of the most corrupt motherfuckers we dealt with. But hey, he gave us Panama. He let us stay there for a while, and then when he lost his usefulness, we went and took him out.
Yeah. Okay. But there's a difference.
Never existed.
But there's a difference. The Kurds are actually democratic, though. The Kurds actually sympathize with Israel. The Kurds sympathize with the West. In fact, Christopher Hitchens wrote a considerable amount about this. The Kurds, for a long time, we're not just talking about the Syrian civil war, we're talking going back decades, have been a long-time partner, actually, of Israel and the West. They're not just going to turn on us and side with Iran. Iran hates them. They're going to side with Assad. Assad hates them. They're on our side.
Has turned on us several times.
What?
The PKK has turned on.
Okay. The PKK is one thing,
dude.
No.
Yes,
okay, they're Kurds. But you're trying to slander people. You're trying to slander people of like 30 million people by talking about the PKK. Additionally, here's the other thing. Here's the other thing that's amazing to it. It ignores the Turkish repression of Kurds in that area. If I was Kurdish and lived in Turkey, I might consider joining the PKK as well. I mean, it's tough to think about, but you got to try to understand things from their perspective. And I would argue that the Kurds are a much better and more consistent ally to the West in America than Erdogan or than Iran or than any of their opponents or than Assad. So
you realize why Northern Watch was set up, right? You understand the idea behind Northern Watch?
Yeah, look, here's the thing. Turkey
is
an ally. Turkey is an ally of America, ended when Erdogan won the coup. Let's just be real about that. They buy all their shit from Russia. They buy all their shit from Russia now, and they're opposed to U.S. interests in Syria. So when you talk about all this stuff back in the day, we're talking about a different era. The fact is, Erdogan is a different era. I would kick him out of NATO.
You don't even let me talk. So here's the deal. Turkey never has really been an ally of America. They just let us operate out of there here and there. Okay, I'll be quite frank with you. Fuck the Turks too. The only reason why Northern Watch existed was to protect the Turks. Not the Turks, the PKK. Not the PKK, but just the Kurds. We were actually there to protect the Kurds. The problem with Northern Watch was this. Because we were operating out of Turkish airspace, mostly out of Incirlik, Turkey, in Incirlik Air Base, Turkey, we actually had to share our intel with the Turks. We did this through a version of communications called Tatile. What we would do is we would fly over, we would locate where the Kurds are, because the Kurds are quite nomadic in northern Syria, northern Iraq. They have to keep on the move under threat of persecution because Arabs don't like Kurds. Tracking, guess what? Turks fucking hate them too. So we would actually locate them occasionally, usually about once a week or whatever, different groups and stuff. We would actually send people like Pararescue and Green Berets in there to check on them. We would deliver humanitarian items such as food and such to them to help them out. The problem is because of Tatile is actually a land-based intelligence sharing platform. So what you would do is you would send telemetry to ground units. Most of these ground units were actually controlled by the Turkish Air Force and the Turkish Army. Part of the treaty, part of the SOFA there, actually required that we shared every bit of intel. Now, occasionally we could claim that we were having issues with our communications, and we played that game as much as we could. However, once we found a decent group of them and we shared that imagery with Turkey, what they would do is they would shut down that ground terminal and then claim that oh well, you're no longer sharing intel, y'all have to land. We would end up landing and they would end up launching strike fighters, usually filled with bombs.
Okay.
Usually the next day we'd go back to that exact spot where the telemetry showed we would find bombed out Kurds. Okay,
Okay,
Turkey
but
has never really been our ally. Turkey
but
joined NATO because they were worried about Soviet incursion, not Russian. They don't give a fuck about Russia. They cared about Soviets. They didn't want the
okay.
communist bit.
So
So
Russia
that's the
right
reason
now,
why
they're
they joined.
actually partners with Russia right now in a lot of ways. They buy a
Well,
lot of their
they
stuff from them.
bought the
Look,
S-400.
yeah, they bought the
S-400
S-400s. They
system.
turn away the F-35s. Erdogan is an authoritarian. He's on the
Yeah,
spectrum of fascism. He's nowhere near Iran or Syria, but he's on it, and
yeah.
he's moving. And he's moving Turkey
he's a terrible
away. He's
person.
moving Turkey away. Look, here's the thing, right? We can't be here all night. I want to just bring this back to Ukraine a little bit briefly. So I think fundamentally what this comes down to is, look, it's about values. And the thing is, America is more than just the land that it has. It's more than just the people that it has. It's actually an ideology. It's a superpower. And America's interests go beyond its own borders. And I look, when we come to Ukraine, and when we're talking about Ukraine, I think it's an important thing to note that the Euromaidan movement that overthrew the yoke of Yanukovych and Putin's dictatorship in Ukraine and actually freed themselves from his oppression, that they were led by liberals, they were led by feminists, they were led by lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender advocates, they were led by anti-corruption folks. And I think that the image and the direction that Ukraine is moving in and wants to move in and what they aspire to, look, I got to be real with you. I think it to some extent it does make you uncomfortable, because as much as you can say that you sympathize with American culture and you like what American culture has done for Europe, I heard you, and I want to just see if you've changed your mind about this. But you said to Dylan Burns on a December 13th conversation that you said that if trans people were murdered for not simply saying that they're trans, if they go to date people, that's just karma. That what are you going to do? That's just what it is. So do you stand by those statements? Because it seems like you yourself have fascistic sympathies, and you yourself have very anti-LGBT sympathies. And so it makes sense why you might oppose standing in solidarity with Ukraine, because you have a lot more in common with Vladimir Putin than with the Euromaidan. Do you stand by those statements that you said on the 13th of December to Dylan Burns?
So the mischaracterization of what I said.
I just watched the stream before the debate. It's not a mischaracterization. You described it as karma. If they got shot.
No. So shut up. Let me respond, for fuck's sake. See, this is your tactic. What you like to do is you just basically just keep talking. You gish gallop. It's what you do, man. It's okay, man.
And your tactic is you make yourself unemployable in any sort of polite circles of society. Okay, great. So
okay.
I want you on the record. I want to know if you've learned anything from that absolute shit show, and I want you on the record here. Do you stand by your statement that if a transsexual person, as you say, deceives or isn't straight up front about them being trans in dating, if they're murdered by their sexual partner as a result of that's just they got their karma, and therefore can we really send that guy to jail? I want you on the record. Do you stand by those statements that you said on the 13th of December 2021?
So first of all, what I said is if anyone engages in the act of rape, whatever happens to that rapist afterwards by the victim, at the hands of that victim, I do not care about it. But if they do murder that person, they should go to prison. However, I'm not going to sit there and really sob because I don't really care. Okay, that's where I stand. That's my actual stance.
Okay. So that's your clarification. Okay.
When it comes down to the Ukraine and stuff, it has nothing to do with Russian sympathies or anything like that. It is a pro-American sympathy. It is, as a veteran, as someone who has actually, I don't know, been to combat and will put their life on the line for the country, tired of being used as a pawn for freaking corporations. Because I hate to break this to you, my guy, but it's Halliburton and stuff that we fought for. It wasn't for the Iraqis. It wasn't for the Afghanistan.
Here we go with the Noam Chomsky line. It was all Michael Moore, Halliburton. 9/11 was an inside job memes.
No, 9/11 was not an inside job.
Look. I just, the reason why I want to get you on the record there is I think it'll stand as a testament to the audience here that when we see people opposed standing in solidarity with Ukraine, understand that the reason why we stand in solidarity with Ukraine is that they're a liberal democracy aspiring to be like us, to have Western values of sexual freedom, human rights, all that type of stuff. The world that you see, the America that you believe in, is an America that really is fading away. It exists in backwaters of America, the generally lower income backwaters of America, but it is receding, and it will be vanquished by the tide of history because the liberals are winning the culture war, and it's something that even in 100 years, the most conservative person you could debate will defend trans rights to the end of the earth, and they'll be debating about other issues at that point. Your characterization, your lack of concern for even, like, because I'm not surprised by your lack of concern for Afghans or for Iraqis or whatever. Okay, but understand your whole point is that you just care about Americans and you care about America. Yet American trans people, if they get murdered, you're not going to cry over them. You're not going to cry over them. And so I would say that in America that shares your cultural values has far more in common with fascist Russia than anything set out in the contemporary and enlightened American project. And so I look at this point. We're coming up on almost 3 hours. I don't have anything else that I wanted to grill you on. I am honestly, I can't say I'm surprised, but I will say that I'm disappointed that you, after all the flack that you got for your absolutely heinous remarks, the false equivalence between lynching and non-hate based crime, and of course the remarks about transsexual people, the fact that you haven't learned anything, the fact that you haven't reflected on it or anything, what it tells me is that you're going to eventually, as we all do, go to the grave, but you'll go to the grave hating your heart towards people that never did anything wrong towards you. It's honestly completely grotesque, and I expect you'll probably get a lot of flack over your statements about just bombing every Afghan village, to go after a few Taliban fighters, your disregard for collateral damage and everything. I think honestly, I think my job is done here to hold you on the record for this. I'll say I'm disappointed in your disconcern and your absolute fascistic tendencies, and of course at the end of the day you want to hand Ukraine to Russia because you want to turn America in many ways into a Russian style society when it comes to sexual freedoms. So with that being said, I think we're done here. Okay, that we end the call. Okay, so we'll go back. So we were actually screen sharing from the Discord. So we're going to end the screen sharing there and go over the webcam system here. Dylan Burns was a little bit more polite to him. I'm not really as polite as Dylan Burns is to deep reactionaries, and no fault to Dylan Burns. I think he's more, we'll bring up my capture device. We're just going to close out these guys, close out this guy. Yes. Yeah, no, Dylan is a pretty friendly guy. I was, there was a part of me that was hoping that Aircraft Sparky would have said something like how, and let's just make sure we get this in place. We need to activate it. And there we are. Okay, wonderful. Yeah, there was a part of me that was, I wouldn't say hopeful, but there was a small part of me that said, maybe, he got so much heat over his comments on the 13th of December that maybe he would say to me, look, if I could go back, I would have phrased it a little bit differently. Obviously, it would be horrible and all that type of stuff and everything. And, if I knew somebody like that, if somebody in my family was transsexual, I wouldn't like that or whatever, because like you look at somebody like Dick Cheney. Obviously, Dick Cheney's somebody I've got quite a few disagreements with on social policy, but Dick Cheney, he came around on gay rights, and it took somebody in his family being gay to do it, but he opened his heart to that, And way sooner than Obama ever did. Obama was just checking the poll numbers. Dick Cheney did it when it was unpopular to be conservative and support gay rights. Obama was progressive and couldn't support gay rights formally. So, it's not like conservatives can't come around on this. They absolutely can. Dick Cheney can't. Now, Aircraft Sparky hates Dick Cheney, and he was basically slandering Dick Cheney tonight, saying how all this stuff was just, they're being sent to die for Dick Cheney. It was all for Halliburton, with Dick Cheney's company to profit. Yeah, that's conspiratorial. Gonna need some evidence on that one, bud. I'm not as friendly as Dylan Burns is, and Dylan Burns was right when he said that if you were to speak, when he was talking to Aircraft Sparky, he said to Aircraft, if you were to speak to anybody else on this platform, they would not be as calm as Dylan was hearing all that bullshit. And here's the thing, I wanted to go in and debate him that night. I was in the chat, but they wanted it to be a one-on-one. I wanted to grill that guy. I got to grill him tonight. And I think we exposed Aircraft Sparky. I think we absolutely illustrated that not only does he not care about anybody outside of America, like at all. In fact, he's willing to kill 40 million people to kill a couple terrorists. And he admitted that tonight. But he doesn't even really care about people inside America, because even if a U.S. citizen happens to be transsexual, he has no sympathy for them whatsoever. No sympathy whatsoever. And his clarification tonight was, yeah, the murderer goes to jail because it's murder or whatever, but I'm not crying any tears for the transsexual. I have a hard time believing that if he was in power, I have a very, very hard time believing that if he was in power in any sort of capacity to influence the judiciary in the United States, or the Supreme Court in the United States, or in the executive branch of the United States, that he would actually enforce any sort of justice in those cases. Because as we know, in the United States, there are exemptions. They call it trans panic, right? Oh, well, I thought that he was a woman, but it turned out that he was trans or whatever. So I shot him. That actually is a legal defense and has been used as a legal defense. Dylan Burns noted in that interview that he had, deeply disturbing interview, by the way, on the 13th of December, uploaded to YouTube on the 14th, if you go and check it out. He was calm. I was livid in the chat. I was pissed listening to this crap in the chat. I was like, let me at him. I want to grill this guy. Took me almost 2 months to get my chance to do it, but I got my opportunity to grill him. And we don't have all night here. I've got videos and stuff to film, right? I don't want to give him all the attention. I don't want him to get like an 8-hour stream or anything like that. You know, we get our debate. He gets his one debate, and you guys get to see the reality of Aircraft Sparky and what he's about. This is a guy who has said things like, oh, well, I joke about running protesters over all the time. What's the big deal? That's like the least problematic of this guy's statements, basically. So understand something. If he was in charge, he wouldn't even have that attitude of, okay, well, it was murder. We'll prosecute the murder. My guess is he would say, yeah, what are you going to do? And let him get away with it. Because that's what's happened throughout a lot of American history. This is heinous. It's grotesque. The fact that he doubled down on it is just, I mean, again, it's disappointing. It's not surprising, but it is disappointing. So, look, he'll tell you, well, he's about Americans. He's about Americans if you're white, Christian, a male. I mean, he even said, yeah, the only true democracy in history was a democracy where women can even vote. And a democracy like Switzerland where women can vote, not really a democracy. Only Athens was a democracy. He doesn't care about women's rights. He doesn't care about trans rights. He doesn't care about liberty. He doesn't care about sexual freedom, human rights. He doesn't care about any of this stuff. And in fact, even if I did believe him that he genuinely thought that this was ultimately in America's strategic interest to just withdraw in a bunch of places, what would even be the point of upholding and preserving America if it was going to be like the society that he would have America be. I wouldn't want to live there. What's the point in defending that? At that point, why not go and join the Russian army and defend Russia? At that point, you've just basically turned America into an ultra conservative shithole, basically, right? So, look, he doesn't even care about people in America. Total mask off moment there when he straight up said, yeah, no sympathy whatsoever. You know, in his interview with Dylan Burns, he would often say LGB, but leave out the T, leave out trans people and everything. Yeah, I have a very hard time thinking his administration would have any sort of a favorable approach to lesbians, gays, and bisexuals. Definitely not lesbians and gays, right? But explicitly not trans people. He's hostile to trans people. He is an enemy of trans people, and I consider myself, look, I'm straight. I'm cis, I'm cisgendered or whatever the hell you want to call it. I don't even particularly like a lot of the gender discourse, but you know, I'm a male, right? I'm not trans. I'm straight, right? I'm the token straight in our community. A lot of people here are like gays, bisexuals, etc. Right? People are like, "Oh, Kevin's gay." It's like, no, I'm like the token straight, dude. You can call a lot of other people gay. Can't really call me gay. I'm an ally, and if you're an ally to trans people, when you see somebody who's hostile to trans people, well, now they are your enemy, basically, right? And I think that this debate will go down and actually stand as a testament to how fascist apologists operate in the 21st century. A great way to defend a fascist regime is to say, well, they're not literally Hitler or Mussolini. They don't call themselves fascists, so therefore they're not fascist. And when I say, well, there's a spectrum, they say, no, you're either 100% or you're not. You're either a democracy or you're not. He doesn't think America's a democracy. He doesn't think Switzerland's a democracy. So, but I'm not really too concerned about that stuff. That stuff's goofy. But what I think it was he didn't want to fall into a double standard because he knew he was applying that logic to fascism. So it wasn't so much about criticizing America. It was more about protecting the Russian system. He can say, oh, they're authoritarian and all that stuff, but you'll notice he was greatly diminishing just how heinous the Russian regime is. And he was actually comparing it to America, a country that does have human rights, a country that does have rule of law, a country that does not have arbitrary detention, right? A country where you actually have to have a warrant. You can't just arrest a billionaire because they don't like Joe Biden. Whereas in Russia, you can definitely arrest a billionaire if they don't like Vladimir Putin. They do it all the time. I thought it was heinous. And so based on this, we can draw two conclusions. And I do want to say basic BTH in the chat. Thank you for the tier 1 subscription. I really appreciate that. That supports what I do here with daily content. That helps power daily content. That helps basically keep this stuff going. Keep us doing what we're doing here. Lighting up the enemies of freedom, basically. Putting them on trial, prosecuting them, and in the public discourse and showing everybody what these people are about, and absolutely eviscerating them. I want to say that there were two conclusions that we can draw from this. One, he doesn't actually have American security at hand, even if he thinks he does, because his policy of retreat would ultimately see America become more vulnerable. You're better to have the pressure on them in their border or near their border than wait for them to put the pressure on you in your border or near your border, right? If you don't contain the enemy will contain you. They'll jump at the opportunity. If America no longer wants to be the world police, then Russia and China will be happy to take on that title. On whose behalf will they be doing the policing? Will it be the people on the ground getting oppressed and murdered? No, it'll be their puppet regimes, right? Assad, Tehran, Erdogan, Orban, Lukashenko, Kim, Xi Jinping, etc., right? And it will be to oppress the people on the ground, right? And the second conclusion that we can take away from this. So the first one was despite advocating for an America-centric strategy, he would actually compromise American security by pulling back the battle lines, right? The second is, even if his policies did actually ensure American security, which I've proven tonight that they wouldn't, but even if they did, the society that he would establish within America would render that to be a country that wouldn't even be worth preserving. It would not be worth defending. It wouldn't be worth acting in its interest. It would be a country that you'd want to move away, move to Canada, move to the United Kingdom, move to Australia, move to a place that actually does care about human rights, right? So I think I did a damn good job tonight. You know, I say that a lot. I've got a big ego. But I think that this debate stands for itself. I think the only error that I made tonight was the fact that I did not set the audio on OBS for about the first 5 to 10 minutes on his end, and then about the first few minutes on my end. So you guys missed out on that. I'm uploading it anyway. I know he streamed this. If you want to go and watch this debate over on his channel, you can see the full thing. OBS sucks. OBS defaults to no volume as opposed to my speaker or to my microphone, because I often switch between speaker and microphone. It'll just default to nothing. That's stupid. That's dumb. That's the only error I made tonight. I absolutely grilled this guy. Basic BTH says, I bet he never met one trans person in his life, too. Or though. Well, the thing is, I bet he has. That's the thing. I bet he has. I very much guarantee you that he has. And I'm not a betting man. But if I were to put money on things, I would put money that he has. And one of the reasons why I say this is that despite being an ultra-conservative goober, despite being a goober con, despite being, you know, incredibly heinous and toxic and incredibly brand unfriendly, he is a Twitch streamer. There are a considerable number of transsexual Twitch streamers on Twitch. And I guarantee you, I can't recall off the top of my head, but on some of the panels he's been on, whether it's Dylan Burns, whether it's any of the other ones that he goes on, he's encountered trans people. He's met them. He's been acquainted with them. He's probably even met one or two in his personal life. And my guess is, if I were to put money on it, he thinks they're degenerates and they're going to burn in hell. Now, Basic BTH says, I mean IRL. Okay, fair enough. My guess is he has. And there's a chance he's bullied them when he was younger. I'm not saying he has, but I'm saying that people with his mentality today probably bullied people like that when they were in high school, right? Probably thought that he was better than them, right? I'm not saying he did. I'm just saying if anybody were to give off those vibes, it would be somebody who comes here tonight to double down on an absolutely heinous set of remarks that left the chat speechless when Dylan Burns interviewed him. I can't believe he admitted that. Well, I mean, I can believe it, but again, it's still technically disappointing that he didn't learn anything from being completely grilled over what happened in December when he said what he did about trans people. Unbelievable, man. So these are the people that I debate, that I eviscerate. This is the caliber of our opponents. Look, I got to tell you, if you're out there and you're a little bit skeptical about me, and you're not really necessarily 100% on board with defending liberty and stuff around the world, you're not really down with the Iraq War yet. You still need to be swayed on that a little bit. You're not. I would suggest to you to read a book, but you're not 100% committed to defending Ukraine. You're not 100% committed to the liberal cause. I want you to just take a moment here. Look, you don't have to like me. You don't have to like my beard. You don't have to like my ears, right? You don't have to like my voice or whatever. But if you're here, or if you're watching this at a later date, if it's on his stream, if it's on my YouTube channel, if it's on his YouTube channel, if maybe a different streamer reacts to this down the road in the next couple decades or so, if you're watching this and you're hearing this, consider something. This is the face. What I just exposed to you is the face of the anti-war movement taking the mask off. This is why these people are anti-war, because they don't believe in anything. They don't believe in anything. They would sooner sympathize and move to Russia than they would want to uphold American interests in the world. That's what we're looking at right here. And I would say to you, are you comfortable being bedfellows with people that hold this ideology? Because you can't believe in human rights and be anti-war. You can't support trans rights and be anti-war. You can't support LGBT rights at large and be anti-war, because the fact of the matter is we don't live in a world of Western democracies yet. We live in a world divided between islands of freedom, on which myself and he were privileged enough to be born, and a world divided between continents of slavery, which he's content to let suffer forever in perpetuity because, I wasn't born there. You know, thinking back, I wish I could have said this to him before I ended the call, but he might see this. He'll probably see this. Look, I'm an anti-theist, right? I'm an atheist that's opposed to religion. But if I'm wrong and reincarnation does exist, then there actually is life after death and you can come back in a different life. I hope. I sure as hell hope. You know, he has his comments about trans people getting their karma if they get murdered, right? I sure as hell hope he gets his karma and he gets born to live under the Taliban or born to live under North Korea, right? Or born to live under Bashar the Butcher in Syria. That's what I hope. That's what I hope. In fact, I hope every anti-war person out there gets their karma when they're reborn. Unfortunately, I know that that's not going to happen. You know, there's nothing after death. But if we were to live in a more just world, right? I would hope if you're opposed to liberating North Korea, in your next life, you're born in North Korea and have to spend your entire life in a concentration camp there. That's what I would hope. That's what I would hope, because it's easy to say, well, I wasn't born there. Yeah. Except you had a higher chance being born in one of these regimes than you did in America. I was born in Canada. I had a higher chance of being born in Afghanistan. Might I look at that and say, might we have an interest in actually helping those people? Because the fight on terror will not be won by knocking out the head of whatever terror group sprouts up this year. It will be won by westernizing the world and de-radicalizing that part of the world. If we let it fester and we just go in every time they attack us and knock out their leader, you know, another Osama bin Laden, another Osama bin Laden, that is a forever war. We'll literally be doing that for hundreds of millions of years. But my project could see the world at peace within a few centuries to a millennium. That's not a forever war. His would be a forever war. We'd always have to go back there. So there we are. There we are. So Druid Andrews says, you don't have to be a theist to believe in a cyclical universe where you emerge from nature again. Fair enough. I see what you're saying. I've had no evidence demonstrated to me to say that reincarnation is a thing. It could exist. I haven't seen any evidence to believe in it. If it does exist, I hope he's reborn in Afghanistan under the Taliban. Absolutely. Absolutely. We have here, first time in the chat, Duke Ferg says, hey, Kevin from YouTube here. Love your base videos. Glad to see there are still hawk chads out there. Keep up the great work. Yeah. Hawk chads, hawk gang. Let's go. Let's flip and go. Let's go. We got Hawk Dance in the chat. If you want that emote out there, by the way, subscribe to me, Tier 1. Helps power what I do every day here on Twitch. In fact, you don't even have to pay for it. If you got Amazon Prime, instead of giving Bezos, all your money, all your Prime money, you still give him all your Prime money, but now he gives me a cut of that. If you subscribe to this channel with Prime, you actually don't pay any extra money at all. But some of the revenue that Amazon gets out of your Prime subscription goes to give me $2.50 a month. And you can do it by going where you click on subscribe. You don't even don't use your credit card or whatever, any of that sort of stuff. You already got Prime membership. You don't need to pay twice. You can actually still support me just the same by clicking Prime, and you can do it each month. So you can be permanently subscribed to this channel by re-clicking that every month without having to pay a cent extra if you've got Amazon Prime. And in fact, I'll say this is not sponsored. You should probably have Amazon Prime. I know I've criticized Amazon and how light they've taken to get my new desk to me today, for example. We're still waiting on that, but that will be here. No, they do refund. They will refund you. Sometimes they'll give you a credit if they screw things up. You should probably have Amazon Prime, and most of the time it works out great and you get your stuff very quickly. And you won't have to spend $8 or whatever a month to be subbed here. You can just click subscribe with Prime, and now I get $2.50 and you don't have to pay any extra. So it's a win-win. Let's go. So let's get those Prime subs up. Once we hit 25 subs on this channel, by the way, we get another emote slot open. So Arthur has made free emotes. This you can use just simply by following my channel. We got G-O, we got double O, we got O-B, and we got E-R. What's that spell? Goober. Who'd I debate tonight? Goober. So we definitely look. He's like, oh, you like Goober. You like to use Goober. And I'm just thinking, I'm like, well, it seems like an apt name to use here. I mean, he didn't think that Poland bordered Ukraine. And then he basically did, oh, I guess I didn't look at a map or whatever, like Alex Stein energy. But I think what's probably more fantastically amazing than that, he thought Spain had nuclear weapons. Not like American nukes stationed in Spain. I'm not sure. They might have been stationed there at some point during the Cold War. I know that the U.S. had B-52s, for example, that lost a couple nukes off the coast of Spain. But he wasn't talking about that. He thought Spain had nukes. He was talking about how nuclear proliferation, it's all good. Who cares? Spain's got nukes. Spain doesn't have nukes. He said, look, you got these superpowers in Europe. Why can't they do something? You got France. They got a lot of nukes. They're a superpower. You got the UK. They got a lot of nukes. They're a superpower. You got Spain. They got a lot of nukes. They're a superpower. No, they're not. No, I wouldn't even call Spain a great power. They're like a middling power. They're kind of like with like Turkey and stuff. I would call France and the UK great powers. They have nukes. Yes, they have independent nukes. How? Like, how do you have that long of a career in the military and think Spain's got its own nuclear? How could Spain have its own nuclear program and everything? It's mind-boggling to me how somebody who has such strong opinions on how we need to leave the world has so little knowledge of the world. And he doesn't have the excuse that a lot of people do. A lot of people that are isolationists, their excuse is going to the grocery store is the furthest from their house they've ever left. He's been to Moscow. He's been to Afghanistan. He was in Iraq. He doesn't have the excuse to be this ignorant of the world. It's embarrassing. I've never left North America. As Michael Hilliard would say, yeah, you never left North America. Therefore, your opinions on Afghanistan and Iran are invalid. My opinions are valid because I met their leaders and they gave me coffee. No, that dude was goober pilled for sure. Look, I know more about Spain than this guy does, and I've never been to Spain. I don't know, man. It's incredible. Like, your brain on anti-war propaganda is one hell of a thing to witness. My God, I don't even have a God, and I'm saying here, my God, do I pity anybody in that position? I mean, man, I'm not saying pity him. I really do think, he's not ignorant per se about a lot of this stuff. I think he knows, right? He just doesn't care. I think when I asked for clarifications on a number of his really mask off moments there, and he said, did I stutter? No, he knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing. He doesn't get the, You know, he doesn't get the pass of naivety or whatever. He knows what he's saying. He knows how heinous it is, and he's mask off about it. What did I say? He is really, truly, Aircraft Sparky is the face of the anti-war movement, taking the mask off, because its face is normally, oh, we just don't want people to die. But what happens when it takes its mask off? It says, we don't care how many people die. We're the real bad guys, and trans people are bad. Putin's good. Ukraine, the color revolutions were bad. That's the face of the anti-war movement, taking the mask off. It'll present itself as progressive. It'll present itself as for the national interest. In reality, it's anything but. It's incredibly reactionary, incredibly fascistic, incredibly anti-American and anti-Western. And if they could have it their way, they would dissolve America, everything that made America great, and turn America indistinguishably similar to Russia. And so, yes, thank you to Basic BTH for cheering with 100 bits. That also helps me out too. I'm going to talk to Arthur about that. We've got emojis for the bit slot. So when you cheer emoji or cheer bits, we're going to have emojis coming out, custom emojis that you'll be able to use. So I appreciate you cheering right now. We're going to open that up, so there will be more rewards in the future. Basic BTH says, I sent you a bit lengthy PM on my take on Ukraine. Well, no, thank you. I mean, I'm a pretty busy guy, but I'm open to having a conversation even on stream about it, as long as you follow TOS and community guidelines and everything. Look, there were parts there where he borderlined on violating TOS. Right? Like when he said frostback, okay, that's not a slur. That's not a slur, but we know what that's derivative from. There's actually a slur that people will refer to Mexicans, right? That has back as the second part of it, right? And it's not frostback, it's a different back. So we know where he's getting these memes from. He also said he liked that one or whatever. What I mentioned when I alluded to it. Like, so this is a guy who on the Hippy Dippy roundtable, I forget which episode, he said, and I think it was one of the ones that I was present for. He said, well, look, I don't really use the N-word or whatever, and we're all just sitting there thinking like, look, I mean, there are conservatives there thinking probably like, really? Like, okay, you can just say you don't say the N-word. What do you mean you don't really say the N-word? Nobody's buying that. Or when you say, oh yeah, I like that phrase they use for Mexicans. It's like, dude, look, I think it's substantiated. It's borne out by the evidence that he's presented, by his statements on the record that he's doubled down on. I'm going to say it tonight, and then we're going to go off air because I've got some videos to film and I've got to eat dinner. Aircraft Sparky is a racist. He's a misogynist. He's a transphobe. He's a bigot. And at the end of the day, he's a fascist. If you're being charitable to him, you say that he's a fascist apologist because he's just apologizing on behalf of existing fascist regimes. But we all know if he had real power in America, what he might turn it into. So I stand by my statements. He's a racist, a bigot, a misogynist, a transphobe, a fascist, and yes, as well, a fifth column. And I do ever so hope, if reincarnation does turn out to exist, that he will be reborn in Taliban Afghanistan. And I'll say this, if the Hawks come to power and we kick the Taliban out of power, next year or whatever, or in 2025 or whatever, I hope reincarnation works independent of time. I hope he gets reborn in Afghanistan during the time that the Afghan Taliban was in power the first time, when they were arguably to some extent more brutal. Now they are going back to that, right? But that's where we're at. He was opposed to doing anything about them, right? He just wanted to go in there, get out. So no, I hope he does wind up having to live under that, and then after that, in his next life, I hope he gets reborn in Nazi Germany, that sort of thing, right? And here's the thing, it's not actually that personal. I'm not like personally offended by Aircraft Sparky. Like, I see him as a drop in the bucket of the anti-war movement. I hope everybody associated with the anti-war movement is reborn in a fascist dictatorship in their next life, so they can actually see what it's like. They'll be begging for some neoconservatism pretty damn fast, but it'll be too late then. So anyway, yeah, hopefully we get another George W. Bush. Absolutely. Oh, and his slanderous claims that George W. Bush took out Saddam just as a vendetta against his dad. Come on. Like, really? Okay, so I basically tonight, ladies and gentlemen, and everybody watching, tonight I have debated the right wing's Michael Moore. That's what we just witnessed. And it was an absolute victory for us. So we're going to go off air right now. We've actually got some viewers, so I'll see if there's anybody worthy of a raid. See if there's anybody worthy of a raid. I'll have this probably uploaded to YouTube tomorrow. Let's see who's raiding or who's streaming right now. Oh, is that Prime Kai's? Prime Kai raiding. Okay, let's go. Let's go. Or is he streaming? Let's go. Let's raid Prime Kai. Let's flip and go. Let's go. What's he doing? Rehabilitating the unrepentant. Oh, well, isn't that quite fitting? I often find that Prime Kai's themes somehow tie into what we're debating tonight. Rehabilitating the unrepentant. That is very appropriate, because Aircraft Sparky, he did not in any way adjust the severity of the heinous statements that he had uttered on that stream with Dylan, or his statements tonight about, yeah, he would support a genocide against Afghans. Amazing. Have fun at the raid, everybody. Prime is, he's a good guy. He does debate panels. He supports this channel. I support his channel. I'm subscribed to his channel. If you got the extra money and everything, definitely consider supporting Prime as well. I disagree with him on a lot, but he's always down to debate. And that's rare these days. Oftentimes people will not want to talk with hawks because they get spooky. They get spooked by war hawks, right? Oh, we can talk to conservatives, and we can talk to progressives, and we can talk about taxes, and we can talk about trans rights and disagree. Oh, but he supports the Iraq war. He actually supports trans rights in Iraq. We can't talk to him. That's spooky. Can't have that. Whereas with Prime, he'll actually debate this stuff. He'll host debates for this stuff. He'll actually bring hawks on to debate. So, yeah, just as Dylan does. So you gotta support your fellow content creators that actually have a backbone and aren't spooked to bring on different guests. Because I very easily could have said, Sparky's problematic, I'm not going to talk with him. No, I'll debate anybody. Debated him, as long as you can follow TLS. There we go. Okay, and that ended the stream.